High in the Andes Mountains, where the air grows thin and the clouds drift below your feet, there exists a place that seems to belong more to dreams than to history. As you settle into a comfortable position and allow your breathing to slow, let us journey together to a realm of stone and sky, of terraced mountains and golden temples, of a people who built an empire among the clouds. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast mountain ridge, looking out over valleys that stretch endlessly into the misty distance. The morning sun rises slowly over the eastern peaks, casting long golden shadows across ancient stoneworks, so that not even a blade of grass can fit between the joints. This is the world of the Inca, the children of the sun, masters of stone and mountains, architects of one of the most remarkable civilizations our planet has ever known. The story we shall explore tonight spans centuries and crosses some of the most dramatic landscapes on Earth. From the shores of Lake Titicaca to the peaks of the Andes, from the desert coasts of Peru to the tropical forests of the Amazon basin, the Inca Empire grew to encompass nearly 2,000 miles of territory, holding together millions of people under a single administrative system, without the aid of money, markets, or writing as we know it. So let your eyes close gently if you wish, and allow my voice to carry you back through time, across mountains and valleys, to a world where the sun was God, and the emperor was his living representative on earth. Let the rhythm of these words become like the steady footsteps of travelers walking the ancient Inca roads, carrying you deeper and deeper into peaceful rest, while the remarkable story of the Inca unfolds around you. Take a slow, deep breath now. Feel the coolness of mountain air filling your lungs. And as you exhale, release any tension you may be holding. Let your shoulders relax. Let your jaw unclench. And prepare to journey with me to a civilization that rose among the clouds and left behind monuments that still astound the world today. To understand the Inca, we must first understand the land that shaped them. The Andes Mountains run like a great spine along the western edge of South America, stretching more than 4,000 miles from Venezuela in the north to Tierra del Fuego in the south. This is the longest continental mountain range on Earth, and among its peaks and valleys, countless civilizations rose and fell long before the Inca emerged to unite them all. Picture this landscape as the evening light begins to fade. The mountains here are young by geological standards, still rising, still being sculpted by the forces of plate tectonics that push the Nazca Plate beneath the South American continent. Snow-capped peaks tower above 20,000 feet, their glaciers feeding rivers that cascade down through a dizzying variety of ecological zones. In the space of just a few miles, one can travel from frozen tundra through highland grasslands, past cloud forests draped in orchids and bromeliads, down to the lush tropical lowlands of the Amazon basin. This vertical geography created a natural laboratory for human ingenuity, challenging the people who lived here to develop sophisticated systems for farming, water management, and social organization. The highland valleys, known as the Puna, sit between 10,000 and 14,000 feet above sea level. Here, the air is thin but the soil is rich. Potatoes, quinoa, and countless other crops were domesticated in these highlands over thousands of years, providing the agricultural foundation upon which Andean civilizations would build their greatness. Let your mind drift now to Lake Titicaca, that vast body of water, sitting nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, straddling the border between modern Peru and Bolivia. This is the highest navigable lake in the world, and according to Inca mythology, it was from the depths of these sacred waters that the first Inca emerged. The lake stretches for more than 3,000 square miles, its deep blue surface reflecting the surrounding peaks and the endless sky above. The shores of Titicaca have been home to human communities for thousands of years. The Uros people still live here on floating islands made of totora reeds, maintaining a way of life that stretches back into the mists of prehistory. These islands must be constantly replenished as the lower layers rot away, a perpetual process of renewal that has continued for generations beyond counting. As you listen to these words, imagine the gentle lapping of water against reed boats, the call of birds across the lake at dawn, the way the mountain shadows lengthen across the water as the sun sets behind the western peaks. This landscape has witnessed the rise and fall of many cultures, each contributing something to the complex heritage that the Inca would eventually inherit and transform. Long before the Inca built their empire, other great civilizations flourished in the Andes. To understand what the Inca achieved, we must appreciate what came before them, for they were not innovators starting from nothing but inheritors of thousands of years of accumulated wisdom and tradition. The earliest complex societies in the Andes emerged along the Pacific coast more than 5,000 years ago. At a place called Carol, in the Supe Valley of Peru, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a sophisticated urban center that flourished around 2600 BCE, making it contemporary with the pyramids of Egypt. The people of Carol built massive platform mounds, circular plazas, and complex residential areas, all without the use of pottery or apparently any system of writing. What they did have was something perhaps more remarkable: an apparent focus on peaceful cooperation. Unlike many ancient sites, Carol shows no evidence of warfare, no defensive walls, no weapons of war. Instead, the archaeological record reveals a society focused on trade, ritual, and collective building projects. Fish from the coast were exchanged for cotton and other agricultural products from the interior, creating networks of exchange that would persist and expand for millennia. As you settle deeper into relaxation, let your thoughts drift forward through time to the Chavan culture, which flourished between roughly 900 and 200 BCE. At Chavan de Hontar, high in the mountains of northern Peru, priests and rulers built a great temple complex that became a center of religious pilgrimage and political influence. The architecture of Chavan was designed to awe and inspire. Underground galleries wound through the temple, lit only by carefully positioned shafts that allowed sunlight to illuminate sacred images at specific times. Water channels created mysterious rushing sounds that echoed through the stone corridors. At the heart of the complex stood the Lanzan, a 15-foot-tall carved stone monolith depicting a deity with fanged mouth and serpent hair, its image designed to be viewed in the flickering light of torches carried by pilgrims seeking divine favor. The Chavan culture spread its influence through religion and art rather than military conquest. Their distinctive artistic style, featuring complex intertwining forms and supernatural imagery, appeared across a vast region, evidence of a religious horizon that unified diverse peoples through shared belief and practice. This model of spreading influence through cultural, rather than military means, would be remembered and employed by later Andean civilizations, including the Inca themselves. Following the decline of Chavan influence, the Andes entered a period of regional development, during which several distinct cultures emerged and flourished. On the southern coast of Peru, the Nazca people created their famous geoglyphs, enormous drawings etched into the desert floor that can only be fully appreciated from the air. Hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders, and geometric shapes stretch across miles of arid landscape, their purpose still debated by scholars. Were they astronomical markers, ritual pathways, messages to the gods? The mystery adds to their fascination. In the northern highlands, the Machu civilization built impressive adobe pyramids and created some of the most exquisite pottery ever produced in the ancient Americas. Their ceramic vessels depict scenes of daily life, warfare, sacrifice, and mythology with a realism and emotional depth that speaks across the centuries. We can see fishermen casting their nets, warriors engaged in ritual combat, healers treating patients, and rulers presiding over elaborate ceremonies. The Machu lords were buried in tombs filled with treasure, gold and silver ornaments, elaborate headdresses, ceramic vessels, and the bodies of sacrificed retainers who would serve them in the afterlife. The discovery of the Lord of Sapon in 1987 revealed the splendor of Machu royal burials, comparable in richness to the tomb of Tutankhamun in Egypt. Let these images drift through your mind, like clouds passing across a mountain sky. Each of these cultures contributed something to the great tapestry of Andean civilization. Agricultural techniques, architectural knowledge, artistic traditions, religious concepts, all of these flowed down through time like water flowing through mountain channels, eventually reaching the Inca, who would synthesize and transform this vast inheritance. Between approximately 600 and 1000 CE, two great powers dominated the Andes, providing the most direct precedents for the Inca Empire that would follow. These were Wari and Tiwanaku, contemporary civilizations that between them controlled much of the territory that the Inca would later claim as their own. Tiwanaku, located near the southern shores of Lake Titicaca in modern Bolivia, was one of the highest urban centers ever built. At over 12,000 feet above sea level, the city sprawled across several square miles and may have housed as many as 40,000 people at its peak. The site features massive stone monuments, including the famous Gateway of the Sun, a single block of andesite carved with intricate reliefs, depicting a central deity surrounded by rows of winged attendants. The architects of Tiwanaku worked with enormous stones, some weighing over 100 tons, transported from quarries miles away. How they moved these massive blocks without wheels or draft animals remains a subject of wonder and investigation. Their stonework featured the distinctive technique of using metal clamps to hold blocks together, a technology that would be inherited by later Andean builders, including the Inca. The agricultural system of Tiwanaku was equally impressive. To farm the high, cold lands around the lake, they developed raised field systems called sucacalas. These raised beds, separated by channels of water, created microclimates that protected crops from frost. The water absorbed heat during the day and released it at night, extending the growing season and increasing yields in an environment where agriculture would otherwise be precarious. As you breathe slowly and deeply, let your imagination transport you to the ceremonial heart of Tiwanaku, where great stone monoliths still stand sentinel. The largest of these, known as the Bennett monolith, stands over 24 feet tall and weighs approximately 20 tons. It depicts a figure holding a kiro, or ritual drinking vessel, in one hand and a snuff tablet in the other, suggesting the importance of ritual intoxication in Tiwanaku religion. While Tiwanaku flourished in the southern highlands, the Wari Empire expanded from its capital near modern Ayacucho in Peru. The Wari were perhaps the first true empire builders in the Andes, establishing administrative centers across a vast territory and imposing a degree of standardization in architecture, pottery, and presumably governance that foreshadowed Inca practices. Wari cities featured carefully planned layouts with rectangular compounds, administrative buildings, and storage facilities. The standardization of their material culture suggests a powerful central authority capable of imposing its preferences across diverse regions. Some scholars see in Wari the prototype for Inca administrative techniques, including the use of provincial centers to govern distant territories. The relationship between Wari and Tiwanaku remains somewhat mysterious. They shared certain artistic motifs and religious imagery, but whether they were allies, rivals, or simply two expressions of a common cultural tradition is still debated. What is clear is that both civilizations collapsed during the late first millennium, probably due to a combination of drought, internal strife, and the breakdown of the long-distance trade networks that had sustained them. Their collapse left a vacuum in the Andes, a period of fragmentation when various ethnic groups and small kingdoms competed for power and resources. It was from this chaos that the Inca would eventually emerge, not as sudden innovators, but as heirs to a rich tradition of empire building, drawing on techniques and concepts developed over centuries by Wari, Tiwanaku, and the many cultures that preceded them. Every great civilization needs an origin story, a narrative that explains where its people came from and why they are destined for greatness. The Inca had several such stories, each reflecting different aspects of their culture and worldview. As you continue to relax, letting the tension drain from your body, let us explore these ancient tales of beginning. The most famous Inca origin myth tells of the first Inca, Manco Capac, and his sister wife Mama Oclo, who emerged from the waters of Lake Titicaca. According to this story, the sun god, Inta, looked down upon the earth and saw that the people were living in a state of barbarism, without proper laws or civilization. Taking pity on them, he sent his children to bring order to the world. Manco Capac and Mama Oclo rose from the sacred waters of Lake Titicaca, that vast blue mirror reflecting the heavens. The sun god gave them a golden staff, and instructed them to travel until they found a place where the staff would sink into the ground with a single thrust. There they were to establish a city and teach the people the arts of civilization. And so the divine siblings began their journey, walking northward through the high mountains. At each place they stopped, Manco Capac tested the ground with his golden staff, but always the earth resisted. They traveled on, past villages and valleys, until finally they reached a fertile valley surrounded by mountains. Here, at a place called Cuzco, which in the Quechua language means navel or center, the golden staff plunged deep into the earth, signifying that their journey was at an end. This myth established several key principles of Inca ideology. First, it declared the Inca rulers to be children of the sun, divine beings sent to bring civilization to humanity. This claim of divine descent justified their rule and placed them above ordinary mortals. Second, it established Cuzco as the sacred center of the world, the place chosen by the gods themselves as the seat of empire. Third, it portrayed the Inca mission as essentially civilizing, bringing order and proper ways of living to peoples who would otherwise remain in darkness. Another version of the origin story tells of 4 brothers and 4 sisters who emerged from 3 caves at a place called Pacaratambo, which means house of dawn or place of origin. These 8 siblings, known as the IR brothers and sisters, set out together to find a homeland. Their journey was marked by various adventures and conflicts, during which 3 of the brothers were either turned to stone or left behind at sacred sites along the way. Only Ir Manco, along with the 4 sisters, completed the journey to Cuzco. Upon arriving, he took the name Manco Capac and established the Inca dynasty. This version of the myth served to explain the existence of various sacred sites in the landscape around Cuzco, places where the other brothers had been transformed into stone huacas, or sacred objects, that continued to be venerated by the Inca. Let these stories settle into your mind like seeds settling into fertile soil. They speak of emergence, of journey, of divine purpose. Whether the Inca literally believed these tales or understood them as symbolic expressions of deeper truths, the myths shaped how they saw themselves and their role in the world. They were not just rulers but civilizers, not just conquerors but children of the sun, bringing light to darkness. The historical origins of the Inca are, as with most ancient peoples, less dramatic than the myths but no less fascinating. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Inca began as one of many small ethnic groups living in the Cuzco Valley sometime around 1200 CE. At this time, they were far from the mighty empire builders they would become, just another highland community struggling to survive and prosper in the aftermath of the Wari collapse. The Cuzco Valley itself is a remarkable place, sitting at about 11,000 feet above sea level in a fertile basin surrounded by mountains. The valley receives enough rainfall to support agriculture without irrigation, though the Inca would later build elaborate canal systems to increase productivity. 2 rivers, the Huatanay and the Tulumio, flow through the valley, eventually joining to form a tributary of the Great Urubamba River. Picture this valley as it might have appeared in those early days, before the great stone buildings and paved streets, before the temples gleaming with gold and the terraces marching up the mountainsides. There would have been small villages of simple houses, fields of maize and potatoes, herds of llamas grazing on the hillsides. The people would have spoken an early form of Quechua, worshipped local huacas and mountain spirits, and probably had little notion that their descendants would one day rule the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas. The early Inca were one group among many competing for resources and prestige in this region. Their neighbors included the Ayarmaca, the Panagua, the Mina, and numerous other ethnic groups, each with its own territory, its own traditions, and its own ambitions. Warfare and raiding were common, as were strategic marriages and alliances. The early history of the Inca was shaped by this competitive environment, forging them into a warrior people who would eventually triumph over all their rivals. According to Inca historical tradition, preserved in oral form and later recorded by Spanish chroniclers, there were 13 Inca rulers before the Spanish conquest. The first 8 of these are often considered legendary or semi-legendary, their deeds obscured by the mists of time and embellished by generations of storytelling. Yet even these shadowy figures reveal something of early Inca society and its gradual transformation. Manco Capac, the founder, is said to have established the basic institutions of Inca society, the division of Cusco into upper and lower halves Hanan and Hurin, the system of royal islas or descent groups, and the initial ceremonies of sun worship. His successors expanded Inca territory gradually, absorbing neighboring groups through a combination of warfare, diplomacy, and intermarriage. As you continue to relax, breathing slowly and evenly, consider how civilizations grow. Not in great sudden leaps but in incremental steps, each generation building upon the achievements of the last. The early Inca were learning, developing, refining the arts of governance and warfare that their descendants would deploy on a continental scale. Every technique, every institution, every religious concept was being tested and refined in this crucible of highland competition. The traditional list of Inca rulers begins with Manco Capac and continues through a succession of names that echo down through the centuries: Sinchi Roca, Loc Yupanqui, Meda Capac, Capac Yupanqui, Inca Roca, Yahuar Hoacac, and Viracocha Inca. Each ruler, according to tradition, added something to the growing power and sophistication of the Inca state. Sinchi Roca, the second ruler, is credited with institutionalizing the earplug insignia that distinguished Inca nobility. These large golden discs, inserted into stretched earlobes, became such a distinctive mark of Inca status that the Spanish would later call the Inca nobles orjones, or big ears. The practice required years of gradual stretching beginning in childhood, ensuring that the mark of nobility could not be easily faked or acquired by commoners. Loc Yupanqui, the third ruler, is remembered as an administrator who strengthened the internal organization of the Inca state. His reign may have seen the formalization of the Ilu system, the kinship-based communities that formed the basic unit of Inca society. Each Ilu held land in common, worked together on communal projects, and traced its descent from a common ancestor. This system would prove remarkably effective for organizing labor and distributing resources across the empire. The fourth ruler, Meda Capac, is portrayed in the chronicles as a great warrior who significantly expanded Inca territory. Stories tell of his remarkable strength even as a child, and his military campaigns that brought several neighboring groups under Inca control. Whether these accounts reflect historical events or are later projections of imperial ideology back into the legendary past is impossible to say with certainty. Inca Roca, the sixth ruler, is credited with establishing the system of royal panacas, the corporate descent groups that preserved the mummy and the memory of each deceased ruler. When an Inca emperor died, his body was mummified and kept in his palace, attended by his descendants who continued to manage his estates and celebrate his cult. This system meant that Cusco accumulated more and more royal palaces over time, each housing the mummy of a former ruler surrounded by his living descendants. The seventh ruler, Yahuar Hoacac, whose name means he who cries blood, was remembered for a childhood trauma. According to tradition, he was kidnapped as a young prince by enemies of the Inca and wept tears of blood at his captivity. The story, whether literally true or not, speaks to the violent competition that characterized relations between the various groups of the Cusco region during this period. Viracocha Inca, the eighth ruler, takes his name from the great creator god of Andean mythology. His reign, which probably falls somewhere in the early to mid-15th century, marks the transition from legendary to historical times. The events of his reign and those of his successors can be correlated with archaeological evidence and with accounts from conquered peoples, allowing historians to speak with somewhat greater confidence about what actually occurred. Let your mind drift through these names and stories as if through a gallery of ancient portraits. Each face is indistinct, each biography incomplete, yet together they form a chain connecting the mythical founders to the historical emperors who built the empire we know. The truth of their individual deeds matters less than the cumulative process they represent: centuries of slow growth, of learning and adaptation, of building the institutional and cultural foundations that would support one of history's great empires. The year was approximately 1438, and the Inca state faced an existential crisis. From the northwest came the Chancas, a powerful confederation of highland warriors who had been expanding aggressively and now threatened to overwhelm Cusco itself. The elderly Viracocha Inca, along with his designated heir Inca Urco, chose to flee the capital rather than face the invaders. It seemed that the Inca, after centuries of gradual growth, might be swept away entirely. But a younger prince refused to abandon the city. His birth name was Cusi Yupanqui, and according to the later chronicles, he rallied the remaining defenders and prepared to meet the Chanca host outside the walls of Cuzco. The battle that followed would transform the Inca from a regional kingdom into the foundation of a great empire. The chronicles, written decades later by Spanish priests recording Inca oral traditions, portray the battle in miraculous terms. They tell how the very stones of the field rose up to fight for the Inca, transforming into warriors who helped defeat the Chanca army. This legend of the Pururacas, the stones that became soldiers, was commemorated ever afterward, with these stones being carefully preserved and honored as sacred objects that had saved the Inca nation in its hour of greatest need. Whether the battle involved actual miracles or simply desperate courage, the result was decisive. The Chanca were defeated, their confederation broken. Cusi Yupanqui returned to Cusco in triumph, but the crisis was not yet over. His father Viracocha Inca still lived, and still favored the cowardly Inca Urco as his successor. A power struggle ensued, from which Cusi Yupanqui emerged victorious. Taking power, he assumed a new name, Pachacuti, which is often translated as Earth Shaker or Cataclysm, but might more accurately be rendered as He who transforms the world. It was a name he would fully earn in the decades to come, as he transformed the Inca state from a regional power into the largest empire the Americas would know before the European arrival. As you settle even deeper into relaxation, consider this turning point in history. A moment when everything might have ended, when the Inca might have become just another forgotten highland people, conquered and absorbed by their rivals. Instead, crisis became opportunity, and from the flames of near destruction rose an empire that would span a continent. Such are the hinges of history, the moments when the courage of individuals and the accidents of circumstance combine to shape the fate of millions. Pachacuti was not merely a conqueror, he was a builder, an organizer, a visionary who created or systematized many of the institutions that defined the Inca Empire. Under his rule, which lasted from approximately 1438 to 1471, the Inca state was fundamentally transformed, acquiring the characteristics that would make it unique among world civilizations. His first great project was the reconstruction of Cuzco itself. The modest highland town was razed and rebuilt as a grand imperial capital, laid out in the shape of a puma, the sacred mountain lion. The head of the puma was formed by the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, with its massive zigzag walls of perfectly fitted stone. The body extended through the central district of the city, and the tail reached down to where the two rivers joined. At the heart of the new Cuzco stood the Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, the most sacred building in the empire. Its walls were covered with sheets of gold, representing the radiance of Inti, the sun god. Within were golden images of the sun, the moon, the stars, and the thunder, as well as the mummified bodies of former rulers, seated on golden thrones. Spanish conquistadors who later saw the temple before it was destroyed described a garden where every plant, every ear of corn, every insect and lizard was rendered in gold and silver, a frozen paradise of eternal metallic abundance. Pachacuti also formalized the administrative system that allowed the Inca to govern their vast territories. He divided the empire into 4 quarters, called sayas, meeting at Cuzco Chinchisuyu to the northwest, Antisuyu to the northeast, Calasuyu to the southeast, and Cuntasuyu to the southwest. Together, these formed Tahuantinsuyu, the land of the 4 quarters, the official name of the Inca Empire. The decimal administrative system, attributed to Pachacuti, organized the population into hierarchical units based on multiples of 10. At the bottom was the family unit of about 10 households, overseen by a local leader. These were grouped into units of 50, 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000 households, each level with its own official responsible for tax collection, labor organization, and the maintenance of order. This system allowed the Inca to mobilize enormous amounts of labor for their great building projects, their road system, and their military campaigns. The mita, the labor tax that required all households to contribute work to the state, was systematized under Pachacuti's reforms. Rather than paying tribute in goods, subjects owed labor time. They might be called to work on roads, to serve in the army, to farm state lands, to weave cloth for the warehouses, or to serve in one of the many other capacities that kept the empire functioning. In return, the state was expected to provide food, drink, and chicha beer, while people performed their mita service, and to maintain warehouses of goods that could be distributed in times of need. This was an economy without money, without markets in the traditional sense, based entirely on reciprocity and redistribution. The state collected labor, transformed it into goods and infrastructure, and redistributed what it collected according to need and status. When a community suffered crop failure, grain from state warehouses could prevent famine. When soldiers went to war, cloth and weapons from state stores equipped them. The system was remarkably effective, though it required an enormous administrative apparatus to maintain. Let your breathing slow even further as you contemplate this remarkable system. No coins changed hands, no merchants haggled in marketplaces, yet somehow millions of people were organized, fed, clothed, and set to work on projects of staggering ambition. The Inca proved that civilization could be built on principles very different from those that governed the Old World, that human ingenuity could devise multiple paths to complexity and grandeur. While Pachacuti reformed the state, he also expanded its boundaries with relentless energy. The Chanca had been defeated, but they were only the beginning. In campaign after campaign, Inca armies marched out from Cuzco to bring new peoples under imperial rule. To the northwest, the Inca conquered the rich agricultural lands of the Chincha and the highland kingdoms of Huanca. To the southeast, they extended their rule around Lake Titicaca and into the Altiplano of modern Bolivia. The great ruins of Tiwanaku, already ancient and abandoned, were incorporated into Inca territory and Inca mythology, with the Inca claiming these earlier monuments as the work of their own divine ancestors. The Inca method of conquest was sophisticated, combining military force with diplomacy and cultural incorporation. When possible, they preferred to incorporate new peoples peacefully, offering gifts and the benefits of joining the empire in exchange for submission. Local rulers who accepted Inca overlordship were often allowed to retain their positions, becoming intermediate authorities responsible for governing their own people according to Inca laws and providing labor and soldiers when required. Those who refused peaceful incorporation faced the Inca army, a formidable force equipped with slings, clubs, spears, and bronze axes. Inca soldiers wore quilted cotton armor and carried shields, fighting in disciplined formations that could overwhelm less organized opponents. Resistance was punished severely, with rebel leaders executed and populations sometimes relocated to break up potential opposition. The policy of population relocation, known as the Mitma system, served multiple purposes. Rebellious populations could be dispersed to distant parts of the empire, where they would be surrounded by loyal subjects and unable to coordinate resistance. Conversely, loyal populations could be settled in newly conquered or unstable areas, providing a core of reliable subjects to support Inca rule. Over time, this created a complex patchwork of ethnic enclaves throughout the empire, each community maintaining its own traditions while serving within the Inca system. As territories were conquered, the Inca imposed their organizational systems, but generally allowed local customs and even local gods to continue. Subject peoples were required to worship Inti, the sun god, and to recognize the Inca emperor as the sun's representative on earth, but they could also continue to venerate their own huacas and observe their own festivals. This religious tolerance, combined with the practical benefits of Inca administration, helped to reconcile many conquered peoples to their new rulers. Pachacuti was joined in his campaigns by his son Tupac Inca Yupanqui, who proved to be an equally formidable conqueror. While the elderly emperor increasingly focused on consolidating the empire and completing his building projects, the prince led armies ever further afield, pushing the boundaries of Tahuantinsuyu to limits that would have been unimaginable just a generation before. The construction projects of Pachacutai's reign stand among the greatest achievements of human civilization. Without iron tools, without wheeled vehicles, without draft animals larger than the llama, the Inca moved and fitted stones of enormous size with a precision that still astonishes engineers today. Sacsayhuaman, the great fortress above Cuzco, features walls built of stones so large that some weigh over 100 tons. These massive blocks are fitted together so precisely that even today, more than 5 centuries after their placement, it is impossible to insert a knife blade between them. The zigzag pattern of the walls, resembling the teeth of the puma, whose head the fortress represents, created excellent defensive positions from which defenders could catch attackers in crossfire. Spanish chroniclers estimated that 30,000 workers labored for 60 years to construct Sacsayhuaman, and while these numbers may be exaggerated, the scale of the project was certainly immense. The stones were quarried from sites miles away, shaped with stone hammers and bronze chisels, then dragged on wooden rollers and earthen ramps to their final positions. The organization required to coordinate such work represents an administrative achievement as impressive as the stonework itself. But Sacsayhuaman was only one of many projects. Throughout the Cuzco region and beyond, Pachacuti ordered the construction of royal estates, temples, fortresses, and administrative centers. At Ollantaytambo, in the sacred valley of the Urubamba River, massive pink granite blocks were quarried from a mountain across the valley and transported up a steep slope to create an unfinished temple complex of stunning beauty. The Temple of the Sun at Ollantaytambo features 6 enormous monoliths, each weighing many tons, fitted together with such precision that the joints are barely visible. These stones were transported from quarries 4 miles away, crossing the Urubamba River and climbing hundreds of feet up the mountainside. The path of transport, still visible today, shows the incredible engineering skill of the Inca builders, who created temporary roads, ramps, and water channels to aid in moving these massive loads. And then there is Machu Picchu, perhaps the most famous of all Inca sites, though its construction may have continued into the reign of Pachacuti's successors. Perched on a mountain ridge nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, overlooking the Urubamba River far below, this royal estate combines architectural refinement with a setting of breathtaking natural beauty. We will explore Machu Picchu in greater detail later in our journey, but for now, let its image rest in your mind as an example of Inca genius. A city of white granite rising among green peaks, wrapped in clouds and bathed in the golden light of sunset. As you drift deeper into relaxation, consider the hands that built these monuments. Thousands upon thousands of workers, laboring season after season, moving stones that seem impossibly large, shaping them with simple tools, fitting them together with supernatural precision. They worked not for wages, but as part of their obligation to the state, fed and supplied from imperial warehouses, perhaps believing that their labor honored the gods and served the cosmic order. Their names are lost to history, but their work endures, a testament to what human beings can accomplish when organized toward a common purpose. Among the greatest achievements of the Inca was their road system, a network of pathways that bound together the vast territories of Tahuantinsuyu and enabled the rapid movement of armies, administrators, and information across some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. The Inca road network, known as the Q-Hapak Nian, extended for approximately 25,000 miles, making it one of the most extensive road systems in the pre-modern world, comparable to the famous roads of the Roman Empire. 2 main highways ran the length of the empire, one along the coast and one through the highlands, connected by numerous lateral roads that crossed the mountain ranges between them. Building roads in the Andes presented challenges unlike those faced by any other road builders in history. The routes climbed from sea level to passes over 16,000 feet high, crossed rivers on bridges of rope and stone, and clung to cliffsides above dizzying drops. The Inca engineers met each challenge with ingenuity and determination, carving paths through solid rock, building causeways across marshes, and constructing stairways up near vertical slopes. The highland road was often paved with flat stones and featured drainage channels to prevent erosion. In the coastal desert, where pavement was unnecessary, the road was marked by low walls or lines of posts. The standard width was about 3 to 4 meters, wide enough for llama caravans to pass, though in difficult terrain the path might narrow to only a meter or so. At regular intervals along the road stood tambos, way stations where travelers could find shelter, food, and fresh supplies. The spacing of these tambos, typically about a day's journey apart, created a comfortable rhythm of travel. Larger tambos served as administrative centers, with storehouses, lodgings for officials, and spaces for the ceremonies that accompanied state business. The suspension bridges of the Inca are among the most remarkable features of their road system. Where the roads crossed deep gorges, the Inca built bridges of twisted grass rope, some spanning more than 100 feet. The main cables, as thick as a human body, were anchored to stone abutments on either side and supported a walkway of wooden planks. These bridges were renewed regularly, often as a mida obligation of nearby communities, and some remained in use well into the colonial period. Imagine yourself crossing one of these bridges, the cables swaying gently beneath your feet, the river rushing far below, the mountains rising on either side. The experience must have been both terrifying and exhilarating, a demonstration of Inca power over the natural world. For peoples newly conquered by the Inca, crossing such a bridge for the first time must have been a powerful introduction to the capabilities of their new rulers. As you relax even more deeply, let your thoughts follow these roads through the empire, imagining the travelers who walked them, armies marching to distant campaigns, llama caravans carrying goods between ecological zones, administrators traveling to take up their posts, chasquis running with messages from the emperor. The roads were the arteries of the empire, carrying the lifeblood of information and resources that kept the body politic alive. Without writing in the conventional sense, the Inca developed an alternative system for recording and transmitting information, the quipu and the chasqui. Together, these technologies allowed the empire to maintain detailed records and communicate across vast distances with remarkable speed. The chasquis were the relay runners who carried messages along the roads of the empire. Stationed at posts about 1.5 miles apart, these young men waited ready to run at any moment. When a message arrived, the chasqui would run to the next station at top speed, passing the message to the next runner, who would continue the relay. By this means, messages could travel the length of the empire, nearly 2,000 miles, in as little as 5 days. The chasqui system was used for both official communications and for bringing luxury goods to the emperor in Cuzco. Fresh fish from the Pacific coast could reach the highland capital within 2 days, still fit for the royal table. News of rebellions, natural disasters, or military victories traveled almost as quickly, allowing the central government to respond to events throughout the empire with remarkable speed. The messages themselves might be oral, memorized and passed from runner to runner, or they might be encoded in quipus. These recording devices, made of colored strings with knots tied at various positions, could encode numerical information with great precision. Modern researchers have demonstrated that quipus could record census data, tribute records, astronomical observations, and possibly even narrative information, though the full system of quipu notation remains only partially understood. A quipu might consist of a main cord from which hung hundreds of pendant strings, each string's color, length, and knotting pattern conveying specific information. Position on the string indicated decimal place value, while different knot types represented different numbers. The complexity of some surviving quipus suggests a sophisticated system of record keeping that may have been as powerful, in its own way, as alphabetic writing. Specialized officials called quipukamayaks were responsible for creating and interpreting quipus. They were trained from childhood in the art, and each region maintained its own corps of these record keepers. When Spanish administrators later tried to survey the empire, they often relied on quipukamayaks to provide population counts, tribute records, and historical information, finding the quipu system more accurate than their own imported methods. Let your mind rest with this image, a young chasqui waiting at his post in the thin mountain air, listening for the sound of the runner approaching. When he hears the distinctive call, he rises, takes the message, or quipu, and begins his own sprint to the next station, his feet finding the familiar path, his breath measured and controlled, despite the altitude. He is one link in a chain that stretches across mountains and valleys, connecting the empire in a web of communication that no natural barrier can break. Inca society was hierarchical and ordered, with every person born into a place in the social structure. At the apex stood the Sapa Inca, the emperor, who was considered divine, the child of the sun and the living representative of the gods on earth. His power was absolute, his word law, his person sacred. Even the highest nobles prostrated themselves before him and approached his presence barefoot and bearing symbolic burdens. The Sapa Inca was distinguished by symbols of his unique status. The royal fringe, a band of red wool tassels worn across the forehead, was the most important of these. He wore garments of the finest vicuña wool, so soft and valuable that only royalty could use it, and his ear spools were larger and more elaborate than those of other nobles. He ate from golden plates, drank from golden cups, and when he traveled, he was carried on a golden litter by specially chosen bearers. Below the emperor came the royal family, the descendants of previous emperors who belonged to the royal Panacas. Each Panaka maintained the cult of its founding emperor, caring for his mummy, and managing his estates in perpetuity. The heads of these Panacas, along with the highest priests and military commanders, formed the inner circle of the imperial government, advising the emperor and administering the affairs of state. Next in the hierarchy came the Inca nobility, those who claimed descent from the original Inca people of Cuzco. This group provided many of the officials, generals, and administrators who governed the empire. Their status was marked by the large ear spools that distinguished them from commoners, by their fine clothing, and by their exemption from ordinary labor obligations. As the empire expanded, a new category emerged: the Incas by privilege, or honorary Incas. These were members of conquered ethnic groups who had distinguished themselves in service to the empire and were rewarded with some of the privileges of Inca nobility. This created a pathway for advancement that helped to bind talented individuals from throughout the empire to the Inca state. Below the various ranks of nobility came the curacas, the local hereditary chiefs, who governed the various ethnic groups of the empire. These men, and sometimes women, maintained their positions under Inca rule, serving as intermediaries between the imperial administration and their own people. Their sons were often educated in Cuzco, learning Quechua and Inca customs, creating personal bonds that reinforced the political integration of the empire. The vast majority of the population were commoners, members of islas throughout the empire who worked the land, herded llamas, wove cloth, and fulfilled their mida obligations. Their lives were regulated by the demands of the agricultural calendar and the requirements of the state, but they were not slaves. They had rights to the land they worked, could not be separated from their communities except through the formal mitma system, and were entitled to support from state resources in times of need. At the bottom of the social scale were the Yanacona, individuals who had been removed from their islas and assigned to serve the state, the temples, or the nobility directly. Some Yanacona held positions of considerable responsibility and even power, but they lacked the community ties and reciprocal obligations that defined the lives of ordinary commoners. Their status was hereditary, passing to their children. As you continue to relax, breathing slowly and easily, consider this ordered society, where every person knew their place and their obligations. There was little social mobility in the modern sense, but there was security. The state demanded labor, but it also provided for those in need. It was a different kind of social contract than we are used to. Neither better nor worse in some absolute sense, but different, adapted to the unique conditions of the Andean world. The religious beliefs of the Inca shaped every aspect of their civilization, from the layout of their cities to the rhythms of their daily lives. At the center of their cosmos stood Inti, the sun god, source of light, warmth, and agricultural fertility. The Inca emperor, as the son of Inti, mediated between the divine realm and the human world, ensuring the continuation of the cosmic order through proper ritual and sacrifice. The sun was not, however, the supreme deity. That position was held by Viracocha, the creator god who had made the world and all living things. According to Inca mythology, Viracocha had created an earlier race of giants who displeased him, so he destroyed them with a great flood and created humanity anew. He then walked across the land, teaching people how to live, before walking away across the Pacific Ocean, promising to return someday. Alongside these great gods, the Inca venerated a multitude of lesser deities and spiritual forces. Illapa, the thunder god, was particularly important in the highlands, where violent thunderstorms could devastate crops and terrify travelers. The moon, the stars, the rainbow, and countless other natural phenomena were understood as divine beings requiring proper respect and occasional propitiation. Perhaps most distinctive to Andean religion was the concept of huacas, sacred objects and places that pervaded the landscape. A huaca might be a mountain peak, a spring, an oddly shaped rock, an ancient tomb, or a place where something significant had occurred. The area around Cuzco alone contained hundreds of huacas, organized along imaginary lines called sects that radiated out from the Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun. These sects created a sacred geography that mapped religious significance onto the physical landscape. The mummified bodies of ancestors were themselves huacas of particular importance. The mummies of deceased emperors, seated on their thrones in their palaces, were consulted on important matters, brought out for festivals, and treated as if they were still alive. This cult of royal mummies consumed enormous resources, as each Panaka maintained the estates and servants needed to support the ongoing life of their founder's mummy. Sacrifice was an essential part of Inca religion. The most common offerings were llamas, guinea pigs, chicha beer, coca leaves, and fine textiles, burned or buried as gifts to the gods. On rare occasions of particular importance, such as the coronation of a new emperor or the threat of catastrophic drought, human sacrifice might be performed. The Copacacha ceremony involved children selected for their physical perfection, who were taken to high mountain peaks and sacrificed to ensure the prosperity of the empire. The frozen bodies of some Copacacha victims have been found by archaeologists on Andean peaks, preserved by the cold for centuries. These children were dressed in the finest clothing, surrounded by offerings of gold and silver, and apparently given chicha to drink before their deaths. Their sacrifice was understood not as punishment, but as the highest honor, sending them to serve the gods directly while protecting their communities from below. Let your mind settle with these thoughts of Inca spirituality. Their world was alive with sacred power, every mountain and spring and stone potentially housing a spirit that required acknowledgement and respect. The boundary between the living and the dead was permeable, with ancestors continuing to participate in the affairs of their descendants. It was a worldview very different from modern materialist assumptions, yet internally consistent and deeply meaningful to those who lived within it. What was it like to live as an ordinary person in the Inca Empire? Let us imagine ourselves into the daily round of activities that structured the lives of the commoners who formed the majority of the population, those whose labor built the roads and temples, and whose tribute filled the state warehouses. Life centered on the Ailu, the kinship community to which every person belonged from birth. The Ailu was the basic unit of social organization, holding land in common, working together on communal projects, and providing support to members in times of need. Decisions were made collectively, though hereditary leaders called curacas represented the community to the outside world and organized its labor. Houses in the highlands were typically small, single-roomed structures built of fieldstone with thatched roofs. They contained minimal furniture, perhaps a raised platform for sleeping, some niches in the walls for storage, a hearth for cooking. Families spent much of their time outdoors, working in the fields, tending animals, or engaged in craft production. The day began early, before dawn, with prayers and offerings to the rising sun. Breakfast might consist of leftover stew from the previous night, or perhaps toasted maize and a drink of chicha. Then came work, tending crops, herding llamas and alpacas, weaving cloth, making pottery, or whatever other labor the season and the needs of the community required. Agriculture in the Andes required sophisticated techniques to cope with the challenging terrain and climate. The famous agricultural terraces that still adorn mountain slopes throughout the former Inca territory were marvels of engineering, transforming steep hillsides into level planting surfaces while preventing erosion and managing water. Each terrace created a slightly different microclimate, allowing farmers to grow different crops at different levels. The Andean farmers cultivated a remarkable diversity of crops. Potatoes alone came in thousands of varieties, each adapted to slightly different conditions of altitude, moisture, and soil. Maize was grown at lower elevations and was particularly important for making chicha, the fermented corn beer that was essential to all social and religious occasions. Quinoa, a protein-rich grain, thrived at high altitudes where other crops failed. Beans, squash, peppers, and many other vegetables supplemented these staples. Llamas and alpacas were essential to Andean life, providing wool for clothing, meat for food, and transportation for goods. The llama, larger of the two, could carry loads of up to 100 pounds, making it invaluable for trade and transportation. The alpaca, with its finer wool, was raised primarily for fiber, which was spun and woven into cloth of remarkable quality. Weaving was particularly important, as cloth served not only practical functions, but also acted as a form of wealth and tribute. Fine textiles were among the most valued possessions in Andean society, more precious even than gold or silver. Women were the primary weavers, and a girl's training in this essential skill began in early childhood. The finest weavers, selected for their exceptional ability, might be chosen as aklakuna, chosen women, who spent their lives weaving cloth for the state and serving in religious ceremonies. Marriage in the Inca Empire was universal and mandatory. At a certain age, all young people were paired by the curaca, the local chief, in a mass ceremony. Those who had already chosen partners might have their wishes respected, but no one was allowed to remain single. Marriage brought full adult status and the obligations that came with it: tribute, labor service, and participation in community affairs. As darkness fell, families gathered for the main meal of the day, a stew of potatoes, meat, and vegetables, accompanied by chicha. Stories might be told around the fire, tales of ancestors and spirits, of the founding of the community and the deeds of famous heroes. Then sleep, on mats or raised platforms, wrapped in woven blankets against the highland cold, until the cycle began again with the next dawn. Let this rhythm of daily life carry you deeper into relaxation. The rising and setting of the sun, the planting and harvesting of crops, the spinning and weaving of wool, the steady pulse of a society that had found its balance with the land and the seasons. The Inca commoner lived a life of hard work and simple pleasures, bound by obligation but also by community, part of something larger than themselves that gave meaning to their labor and purpose to their days. And so, as this first part of our journey draws to a close, we have traced the story of the Inca from their mysterious origins to the foundations of their empire. We have walked with Manco Capac as he emerged from the sacred waters of Lake Titicaca, stood with Pachacuti as he defended Cuzco against the Chanca invasion, and watched as the institutions and infrastructure of empire took shape across the Andean world. The Inca did not emerge from nothing. They inherited thousands of years of Andean tradition, building upon the achievements of Carol and Chavin, of Nazca and Mach, of Wari and Tiwanaku. What made them unique was their ability to synthesize this inheritance, to create a system of governance that could hold together an empire spanning 20 degrees of latitude, from the equator to the temperate zones. If you are still awake, allow yourself to drift now towards sleep, carrying these images with you into your dreams. Mountains and valleys, temples and terraces, runners on the roads and weavers at their looms. The empire grows, stretching ever outward from Cusco, the navel of the world. In the next part of our journey, we will follow this growth to its fullest extent and explore the wonders that the Inca built in the heart of their mountain domain. Rest now, if you wish. Let your breathing slow, let your body relax completely, let the gentle rhythm of these words carry you into peaceful sleep. The story will continue when you are ready, patient as the mountains themselves, enduring as the stones that the Inca placed with such care, waiting for you whenever you choose to return. Sleep well, dreamer. The children of the sun watch over you from their realm among the clouds. Welcome back, peaceful traveler, to our continuing exploration of the Inca Empire. If you are just joining us, or if you have awakened from restful sleep to find your journey resumed, let us pause for a moment to breathe deeply and settle once more into comfort. In our first chapter, we traced the origins of the Inca people and watched as they transformed from a small highland kingdom into the foundation of a great empire under the remarkable leadership of Pachacuti. Now, as you relax even more deeply, we will explore the empire at its height, walking through the cloud-wrapped citadel of Machu Picchu, marveling at the engineering achievements that still inspire wonder, and discovering how the Inca governed the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas. Let your eyes close gently if they are not already closed. Feel the weight of your body settling into whatever surface supports you. Take a slow, deep breath, filling your lungs with cool mountain air, and as you exhale, release any remaining tension. The journey continues, and the wonders that await will carry you ever deeper into peaceful relaxation. As Pachacuti grew old, he entrusted more and more of the military campaigns to his son, Tupac Inca Panqui. This prince proved to be perhaps the greatest conqueror in Inca history, extending the boundaries of Tahuantinsuyu until it encompassed territories from modern Ecuador in the north to Chile and Argentina in the south. Tupac Inca's northern campaigns brought under Inca control the sophisticated kingdom of Chimor, the last great coastal civilization before the Inca. The Chimu had built their capital at Chan Chan, a vast city of adobe compounds covering nearly 8 square miles on the desert coast of northern Peru. Their artisans were renowned for their metalwork, producing objects of gold and silver that rivaled anything in the Inca world. The conquest of Chimor was not easy. The Chimu were wealthy, well-organized, and defended by formidable fortifications. But the Inca, with their highland armies hardened by altitude and their sophisticated logistics, proved unstoppable. According to tradition, the decisive factor was water. The Inca diverted the irrigation channels upon which Chimor's desert agriculture depended, forcing the kingdom to surrender rather than face starvation. After the conquest, the Inca relocated many Chimu craftsmen to Cuzco, where their skills enriched the imperial workshops. The fusion of highland and coastal artistic traditions produced some of the finest metalwork in the Americas, gold and silver objects of extraordinary beauty that would later astonish the Spanish conquistadors. The Chimu king was brought to Cuzco as an honored captive, his former kingdom incorporated into the Inca administrative system. Tupac Inca's campaigns continued northward into modern Ecuador, where the Inca encountered the Confederation of Quito and other highland groups. These northern peoples proved resistant to Inca rule, and the conquest of this region would not be completed until the reign of Tupac Inca's successor. The difficulty of the northern campaigns reflects the limits of Inca power. While they could conquer and hold vast territories, the further from Cuzco they extended, the more challenging administration and control became. In the south, Tupac Inca pushed the boundaries of the empire deep into what is now Chile and Argentina. The southern frontier reached as far as the Maule River in Chile, where resistance from the Mapuche people finally checked Inca expansion. The cold, forested lands of the far south were difficult to hold and offered little that the Inca valued, so the frontier stabilized roughly where the edge of the Atacama Desert meets more temperate zones. The eastern frontier was even more problematic. The Inca made numerous attempts to extend their rule into the tropical lowlands of the Amazon basin, but the jungle environment proved hostile to highland warriors accustomed to cold, dry conditions. Tropical diseases decimated Inca armies, while the scattered, mobile populations of the forest were difficult to locate and impossible to incorporate into the labor-based Inca economy. The empire's eastern boundary remained at the edge of the cloud forest, where the highlands gave way to endless green jungle stretching toward the Atlantic. As you breathe slowly and deeply, picture the vast extent of this empire. From tropical shores where warm waves lap against sandy beaches, up through coastal deserts painted with ancient geoglyphs, into highland valleys where potatoes grow and llamas graze, across passes where snow lies year-round, and down again into the cloud forests where orchids bloom in eternal mist. All of this, an empire the length of the Andes, held together by roads and relay runners and the unifying cult of the sun. Pachacuti died around 1471, leaving behind a transformed empire and a son fully capable of continuing his work. Tupac Inca Yupanqui ruled until approximately 1493, overseeing the consolidation of the conquests he had made as crown prince and adding new territories to the realm. Under his governance, the administrative systems established by his father were refined and extended throughout the empire. The succession to Inca rulership was not a simple matter of primogeniture. While the new emperor was always chosen from among the sons of the previous ruler, the choice depended on perceived ability and the support of powerful factions at court. This system ensured that capable rulers usually reached the throne, but it also created potential for conflict and civil war when the succession was disputed. Tupac Inca's own succession appears to have been relatively smooth, but the transition after his death was more troubled. His designated heir was a young prince named Huayna Capac, but the boy was initially too young to rule independently. A period of regency followed, during which various factions competed for influence over the young emperor. When Huayna Capac came into his full powers, he proved to be a capable ruler who continued the pattern of expansion and consolidation. His campaigns in the north finally subdued the Quito region, and he established a second imperial capital there, spending much of his reign in the northern provinces. This decision would have fateful consequences for the empire, as we shall see in later chapters. Under Huayna Capac, the Inca Empire reached its maximum extent, stretching from southern Colombia to central Chile, from the Pacific coast to the edge of the Amazon basin. Perhaps 10 to 12 million people lived under Inca rule, speaking dozens of different languages, but united by the Quechua lingua franca, the road system, and the overarching authority of the Sapa Inca. Let these thoughts of empire drift through your mind as you continue to relax. Millions of people, thousands of miles of road, hundreds of administrative centers, all functioning as a single system, under the direction of a god-king in Cuzco. It was an achievement of organization and will that ranks among the greatest in human history, and yet, as we shall see, it contained within itself the seeds of its own destruction. Of all the wonders left behind by the Inca, none captures the imagination quite like Machu Picchu. This remarkable site, perched on a narrow ridge nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by precipitous drops and wrapped in swirling clouds, has become one of the most iconic images of ancient America. For centuries after the Spanish conquest, Machu Picchu lay hidden in the mountains, known only to local farmers who cultivated the ancient terraces and sheltered in the ruined buildings. The site was too remote, too difficult to access, to attract the attention of colonial authorities or treasure hunters. While other Inca sites were plundered and destroyed, Machu Picchu slept in its mountain fastness, waiting to be rediscovered. That rediscovery came in 1911, when the American historian Hiram Bingham was led to the site by a local farmer named Melchor Artiga. Bingham was searching for the last Inca capital, the legendary city of Vilcabamba, where the final Inca rulers had held out against Spanish rule. What he found instead was something equally extraordinary, a virtually intact Inca city, its walls still standing, its plazas still defined, its terraces still clinging to the mountainsides. Bingham's expeditions to Machu Picchu in 1911, 1912, and 1915 brought the site to world attention. His photographs of stone buildings emerging from jungle vegetation, of staircases ascending into the clouds, of the dramatic panorama of surrounding peaks, captured the public imagination and established Machu Picchu as a symbol of the mysterious and wondrous Inca civilization. Modern archaeology has revealed much about the site that Bingham could only guess at. We now know that Machu Picchu was built during the reign of Pachacuti, probably in the mid-15th century. It was not a city in the ordinary sense, not a commercial or administrative center, but rather a royal estate, a retreat where the emperor could escape the pressures of governance and commune with the sacred landscape of the Urubamba Valley. Picture yourself approaching Machu Picchu as an Inca traveler might have done. You have walked for days along mountain trails, climbing from the sacred valley of the Urubamba to the high passes and down again into the cloud forest. The path narrows, hugging cliff faces, crossing chasms on narrow bridges. And then, rounding a final ridge, You see it, white granite buildings arranged in perfect harmony with the mountain, terraces cascading down the slopes like giant stairs, the whole composition framed by the soaring peaks of Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu Mountain. The layout of Machu Picchu reveals the sophisticated planning that went into its construction. The site is divided into two main sectors, an agricultural zone of terraces that provided food for the residents, and an urban zone containing temples, palaces, and residential buildings. A central plaza separates the two zones, with a large stone called the Intihuatana rising above it. The agricultural terraces are themselves engineering marvels. Cut into the steep mountainside, they created flat planting surfaces while preventing erosion on slopes that would otherwise be too steep to farm. Each terrace was carefully constructed with layers of stone, gravel, and soil, the layering designed to promote drainage and prevent waterlogging. Some terraces appear to have been used for growing maize, others for experimental cultivation of crops from different ecological zones. The urban sector contains roughly 200 buildings arranged in distinct compounds. The finest structures, built of precisely fitted white granite, were clearly intended for elite use. These include the Temple of the Sun, a semicircular tower built around a natural rock outcrop, and the Room of the Three Windows, which may have commemorated the mythical origin story of the Inca emerging from three caves. The stonework at Machu Picchu represents the pinnacle of Inca masonry. The finest walls are built in what is called the imperial-style large rectangular blocks of white granite. Their surfaces ground smooth, their edges beveled slightly, so that each block appears to be set into the wall, rather than simply stacked upon it. The joints between blocks are so precise that even today, more than 5 centuries later, the blade of a knife cannot be inserted between them. How did the Inca achieve such precision without iron tools? The answer lies in patient, persistent effort. The granite blocks were shaped using stone hammers, the surfaces ground smooth by rubbing with sand and water. Each block was carefully fitted to its neighbors by a process of trial and error, lifted into place and tested, then removed and adjusted until the fit was perfect. The process was laborious, but produced results of extraordinary durability. The builders of Machu Picchu worked in harmony with the natural landscape, rather than trying to impose an artificial order upon it. Natural rock outcrops were incorporated into buildings, their shapes celebrated rather than hidden. The famous Intihuatana stone, which may have served as an astronomical marker, was carved from living rock at the highest point of the urban sector, its angular form echoing the peaks that surround the site. As you continue to relax, let your mind wander through these ancient spaces. Imagine walking through the Sun Temple, as the first light of dawn streams through its eastern window, illuminating the sacred stone within. Feel the cool stone beneath your feet as you climb the stairs to the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun, where priests once performed ceremonies to ensure the sun's annual return from its northward journey. The past feels very close in a place like this, preserved in stone and silence. The location of Machu Picchu was not chosen at random. The site occupies a position of extraordinary sacred significance in the Andean cosmovision, a place where the powers of earth, water, and sky converge in ways that the Inca considered deeply meaningful. Look at the mountains that surround the site. To the north rises Huayna Picchu, the young peak, its steep slopes crowned with the ruins of a small temple. To the south stands Machu Picchu Mountain, the old peak, from which the site takes its name. These peaks were not merely scenic backdrops but sacred entities in their own right, mountain spirits or apus that the Inca venerated as powerful protectors. The Urubamba River, which loops around the base of the ridge in a dramatic horseshoe bend, was itself a sacred waterway. The Inca called it the Vilcanota, associating it with the Milky Way that arcs across the night sky. In Inca cosmology, the celestial river and the earthly river were reflections of each other, part of a cosmic circulation that connected the worlds of the living, the dead, and the divine. Recent research has revealed that the site's orientation was carefully calculated to align with significant astronomical events. At the winter solstice, the sun rises directly over a distant peak, visible from the Temple of the Sun. At the equinoxes, sunlight enters the temple through its eastern window and falls upon the sacred stone within. These alignments were not accidental but the result of careful planning, designed to link the architecture to the cycles of the heavens. The Intihuatana, whose name means hitching post of the sun, may have played a role in these astronomical observations. Some researchers believe that priests used this carved stone to track the sun's movements throughout the year, predicting the solstices and equinoxes that were so important to agricultural and ritual calendars. Others suggest that the stone served as a symbolic anchor, a place where rituals could tie the sun and prevent it from straying too far north during the winter months. The sacred geography of Machu Picchu extended beyond the visible landscape to include the underground world as well. Several caves beneath the site were modified by the Inca, their interiors carved and fitted with niches for offerings. These caves may have been understood as connections to the Usiu Pacha, the lower world of the dead, and of the sources of fertility that nourished life above. Let your breathing slow even further as you contemplate this layered sacred landscape. Mountains reaching toward the sky world of the gods, rivers flowing through the middle world of the living, caves opening into the world below. And at the center of it all, a city of white stone, where priests and rulers performed the rituals that maintained the cosmic order. This was not merely a beautiful place, but a nexus of spiritual power, a point where the three worlds met, and could be accessed by those who knew the proper ceremonies. Who lived at Machu Picchu? Archaeological evidence suggests that the site supported a population of several hundred to perhaps 1,000 people during its active period. Most of these were servants, priests, and retainers who maintained the estate and served its royal visitors. The emperor himself probably visited only occasionally, escaping the heat and politics of Cusco for the cool tranquility of the mountains. The skeletal remains found at the site reveal something surprising about its population. A majority of the deceased were women, many of them young and showing signs of coming from various regions of the empire. These may have been a klakuna, the chosen women selected in childhood for their beauty and skills, who spent their lives weaving fine cloth and preparing chicha for state ceremonies. Their presence suggests that Machu Picchu served religious as well as residential functions. Daily life at the site would have revolved around the maintenance of its buildings and terraces, the preparation of food and drink, and the performance of rituals. The terraces produced maize, potatoes, and other crops, supplemented by goods brought from lower elevations by llama caravans. The site was self-sufficient in water, with a sophisticated channel system that captured spring water and distributed it to fountains throughout the urban sector. When the emperor visited, Machu Picchu would have come alive with activity. Elaborate ceremonies would be performed at the temples, offerings made to the mountain gods, feasts celebrated in the plazas. The finest foods and drinks, the most beautiful textiles, the most skilled entertainers would all be brought together to honor the divine ruler and maintain his connection with the supernatural powers that sustained his empire. The site was abandoned sometime in the 16th century, probably during the chaos that followed the Spanish conquest. Unlike many Inca sites, there is no evidence that Machu Picchu was ever found by the Spanish, no record of plunder or destruction. Its residents simply left, perhaps fleeing the epidemics that were sweeping through the empire, perhaps withdrawing to more defensible positions as the colonial order imposed itself on the land. The jungle gradually reclaimed the site, trees growing in the plazas, roots prying apart the carefully laid stones. For 4 centuries, Machu Picchu slept, visited only by farmers who tended the ancient terraces and hunters tracking game through the surrounding forests. Its preservation, paradoxically, resulted from its abandonment, from the centuries of neglect that protected it from the colonial destruction suffered by more accessible sites. The engineering achievements of the Inca extended far beyond the famous site of Machu Picchu. Throughout their empire, they built structures that continue to inspire wonder today, accomplishing feats that seem almost impossible given their lack of iron tools, wheeled vehicles, and modern engineering knowledge. Consider the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, overlooking the city of Cusco. Its walls are built of stones so massive that the largest weighs an estimated 300 tons. These enormous blocks are fitted together so precisely that a sheet of paper cannot be inserted between them. The zigzag pattern of the walls, stretching for hundreds of meters, creates an imposing defensive position that would have been virtually impossible to assault. How did the Inca move and shape these titanic stones? Spanish chroniclers recorded the amazement of the first Europeans to see Sacsayhuaman, and their accounts preserve something of Inca building techniques. The stones were quarried from sites miles away, shaped roughly at the quarry to reduce their weight, then transported to the construction site. The transport involved thousands of workers pulling the stones on wooden rollers, using ropes of braided grass, ascending earthen ramps that were removed after construction was complete. The final shaping and fitting of the stones required extraordinary skill and patience. Inca masons used stone hammers to pound the surfaces into shape, checking the fit repeatedly by lowering stones into position with ropes. Where blocks did not fit perfectly, they were raised and adjusted, the process repeated until the fit was exact. The precision achieved by these methods exceeded that of most modern construction. The Inca developed several distinct styles of stonework, each suited to different purposes. The finest style, used for the most sacred buildings, featured large blocks of dressed stone, their surfaces ground smooth, and their edges beveled. A more rustic style used smaller, roughly shaped stones set in mud mortar, suitable for ordinary buildings and terrace walls. The choice of style reflected both practical considerations and the relative importance of different structures in the Inca hierarchy of value. Perhaps most remarkable is how well Inca construction has survived the earthquakes that periodically shake the Andes. While Spanish colonial buildings have repeatedly collapsed, the ancient Inca walls remain standing. The secret lies in their construction technique. The walls tilt slightly inward, the stones are locked together by their irregular shapes, and the joints are tight enough to resist the forces that would otherwise pry the blocks apart. Inca engineers had developed an intuitive understanding of earthquake-resistant construction. The Inca were equally skilled at water engineering, building systems that channeled water from distant sources, irrigated vast agricultural terraces, and provided drinking water to cities and shrines throughout the empire. At Tipan, southeast of Cuzco, the Inca created what may be the most sophisticated water feature in the pre-Columbian Americas. A spring high on the hillside feeds a system of channels, fountains, and cascades that flow down through a series of agricultural terraces. The water is controlled with extraordinary precision, divided and recombined, accelerated and slowed, until it reaches a final pool at the bottom of the site. The engineering at Tipan demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of hydraulics. The channels are carefully sized to maintain consistent flow rates. The drops are calculated to prevent erosion, and the fountains are designed to create pleasing displays without wasting water. Modern engineers who have studied the site marvel at its efficiency and elegance. Similar water systems existed throughout the empire. At Ollantaytambo, channels brought water from glacial sources to fountains in the town and irrigation for the surrounding fields. At Tambomache, just north of Cusco, a spring was elaborated into a ceremonial bath where, according to tradition, the Sapa Inca ritually purified himself. The coastal regions presented different challenges. In the desert valleys of Peru, the Inca inherited and expanded upon irrigation systems built by earlier civilizations. They constructed aqueducts to bring water from rivers to fields miles away, reservoirs to store water for the dry season, and complex distribution networks that ensured equitable access to this precious resource. In some areas, the Inca exploited underground water sources through a technology called puquios. These were underground channels, accessed through spiral wells, that tapped into aquifers flowing beneath the desert surface. The puquios of the Nazca region, some of which still function today, may predate the Inca, but the empire certainly maintained and expanded these systems. As you continue to relax, let the image of flowing water carry you deeper into peace. Imagine the sound of a mountain stream, the cool touch of water on stone, the way sunlight plays on the surface of a fountain. The Inca understood water not only as a practical necessity, but as a sacred substance, the blood of Pachamama, the Earth Mother, flowing through channels that were the veins of the living land. The agricultural terraces of the Inca represent one of the most ambitious landscape transformations in human history. Across thousands of square miles of the Andes, the Inca converted steep mountainsides into productive farmland, creating stepped platforms that still cover the slopes like giant green staircases. Building a terrace required enormous effort. First, the natural slope was cut into steps, each step faced with a stone retaining wall. Behind the wall, layers of different materials were placed to ensure proper drainage: large rocks at the bottom, then gravel, then sand, and finally a layer of topsoil. This layering prevented waterlogging while retaining enough moisture for crops. The height and width of terraces varied depending on the slope and the crops to be grown. Narrow terraces on steep slopes might support only a single row of plants, while broad terraces on gentler grades could accommodate fields many rows wide. The walls themselves were built with a slight backward lean, making them more resistant to the pressure of the soil behind them. At Moray, in the Sacred Valley, the Inca built a remarkable complex of circular terraces that may have served as an agricultural laboratory. The concentric rings of these depressions create a series of microclimates, with temperature differences of several degrees between the top and bottom levels. Some researchers believe that Inca agronomists used Moray to experiment with crops from different ecological zones, testing which varieties would grow at various altitudes and conditions. The agricultural productivity of the terrace systems allowed the Inca to support a large population and accumulate the surplus that funded their building projects and military campaigns. State storehouses throughout the empire held vast quantities of freeze-dried potatoes, dried meat, and other preserved foods, insurance against crop failures and resources for armies on the march. The terraces were maintained through the Mida labor system. Communities were responsible for the upkeep of terraces in their vicinity, repairing walls, clearing irrigation channels, and ensuring that the productive capacity of the land was maintained. This communal responsibility persisted long after the fall of the empire, and many terrace systems remained in use through the colonial period and into modern times. Picture these terraces as they might have appeared in their prime: thousands of step platforms stretching across the mountains, each one planted with maize or potatoes or quinoa, tended by farmers whose ancestors had built and maintained them for generations. It was a landscape utterly transformed by human effort, the mountainsides reshaped into productive gardens that fed an empire. Few civilizations have so thoroughly remade their environment, and few have done so with such elegant respect for the natural contours of the land. The suspension bridges of the Inca are perhaps their most famous engineering achievement, structures that allowed the road system to cross gorges and rivers that would otherwise be impassable. These bridges, made entirely of natural materials, demonstrate the remarkable ingenuity of Inca engineers working within the constraints of their environment. The basic material for Inca bridges was a tough grass called ECU, which grows abundantly in the high Andes. This grass was harvested by communities near the bridge sites, twisted into cords, the cords braided into ropes, and the ropes combined into massive cables. The main cables of a major bridge might be as thick as a human torso, capable of supporting great weight. The cables were anchored to stone abutments on either side of the gorge, stretched across the gap, and connected by a walkway of wooden planks. Smaller ropes served as handrails, though the bridges still swayed alarmingly when crossed. The longest bridges spanned more than 50 meters, suspended high above raging rivers, testing the nerve of all who crossed them. The most famous of these bridges crossed the Apurimac River on the main road from Cuzco to the northern provinces. This bridge, which the Spanish called the Bridge of San Luis Rey after a chapel built nearby, was maintained continuously for more than 500 years, its cables replaced annually in a ceremony that combined practical necessity with religious ritual. The renewal of the Huachaca Bridge, a surviving example of Inca bridge construction, is still performed today by communities in the Canas province of Peru. Each June, the old cables are cut, and the entire bridge is rebuilt over the course of 3 days. Men twist the grass into ropes, women braid the ropes into cables, and specialists oversee the engineering work of stretching and anchoring the new structure. The ceremony attracts visitors from around the world, a living link to Inca engineering traditions. As you drift deeper into relaxation, imagine yourself crossing one of these bridges. The The grass cables creak under your feet. The structure sways gently in the mountain wind. Far below you can hear the rush of the river over rocks. Each step requires trust in the skills of the builders, confidence in materials that seem impossibly fragile to support your weight. Yet the bridge holds, as it has held for generations, carrying travelers across the abyss from one side of the empire to the other. How did the Inca govern an empire of 10 to 12 million people, spread across nearly 2,000 miles of mountain terrain? Without writing in the conventional sense, without money, without wheeled transport, they created one of the most effective administrative systems in the ancient world, a system that ensured the smooth functioning of state and society across vast distances and diverse populations. The foundation of Inca administration was the decimal system of organization attributed to Pachacuti. The entire population was divided into hierarchical units based on multiples of 10. The smallest unit consisted of about 10 households, overseen by a local leader. These were grouped into units of 50, 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000 households, each level with its own official responsible for the people under his authority. This system created a clear chain of command from the Sapa Inca at the apex down to the humblest household in the most remote village. Information flowed upward through the hierarchy: census data, tribute records, reports of local conditions and problems. Orders flowed downward: demands for labor, instructions for construction projects, commands for military service. The system was remarkably efficient, allowing the central government to know what was happening throughout the empire and to mobilize resources quickly when needed. The officials who staffed this system came from various backgrounds. The highest positions, governing entire quarters of the empire or important provinces, were typically held by members of the Inca nobility, men of the royal blood whose loyalty to the emperor was assured by kinship and privilege. Lower positions might be held by local curacas, hereditary chiefs who had submitted to Inca authority and now served as intermediaries between the imperial administration and their own people. To ensure the loyalty of local elites, the Inca employed several strategies. The sons of important curacas were educated in Cuzco, learning Quechua, Inca customs, and the proper respect for the emperor. They served as hostages for their father's good behavior, but they also formed bonds with the imperial family that could transcend local loyalties. When they returned to their homelands, they brought with them an understanding of Inca ways that helped to integrate their communities into the imperial system. The imperial government maintained detailed records of the population, their resources, and their obligations. These records were kept on quipus, the knotted string devices that served as the Inca equivalent of writing. Specialized officials called quiquecamayocs were responsible for creating and interpreting these records, maintaining institutional memory across generations and geographical distances. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of Inca civilization was its economy, which functioned without money, without markets in the conventional sense, and without private ownership of land. This was an economy based on reciprocity and redistribution, on obligations and relationships rather than buying and selling. At the local level, the Ailu, the kinship community, held land in common. Each household had the right to farm enough land to support itself, but the land itself belonged to the community as a whole and could not be sold or permanently alienated. When a young couple married, the Ailu assigned them land to work. When they died, the land returned to the common pool for reassignment. Labor, not land or goods, was the primary form of wealth and obligation. Households owed labor to their Ailu, helping with communal projects and supporting those who could not work for themselves. They owed labor to the state through the Mita system, contributing time to public works, military service, or other state needs. And the state, in turn, owed them sustenance while they worked, protection from enemies, and relief in times of hardship. The Mita obligation could take many forms. A farmer might be called to help build a road or repair an irrigation channel. A craftsman might be assigned to produce pottery or textiles for state storehouses. A young man might serve in the army, marching to distant campaigns that might last years. Women wove cloth for the state, producing the textiles that were so valued in Andean society. The labor was demanding, but it was not slavery Workers were fed and housed while serving their mita, and they retained their connection to their home communities. The state accumulated the products of this labor in vast warehouses throughout the empire. These storehouses, called kulkas, held enormous quantities of freeze-dried potatoes, dried meat, woven cloth, weapons, and other goods. The contents were carefully recorded on quipus and could be drawn upon to feed armies, supply construction projects, or relieve communities suffering from crop failures. This system of redistribution created a kind of social insurance unknown in most ancient societies. When drought or frost destroyed crops in one region, food could be brought from storehouses in other regions. When war required armies to march, supplies were available along the route. The state's ability to mobilize and redistribute resources on this scale was a key factor in Inca power, allowing them to undertake projects and campaigns that would have been impossible for less organized societies. Let these thoughts of organization and order settle into your mind as you continue to relax. A world without money, where work was the measure of value and the community was the source of security. A world where the state provided for its people in return for their labor, where obligations were reciprocal and relationships were the currency of exchange. Different from what we know, but in its own way remarkably effective at meeting human needs and organizing human effort. The Inca year was punctuated by a cycle of festivals that marked the agricultural seasons and reinforced the bonds between rulers and ruled, between the human world and the divine. These ceremonies, elaborate and colorful, brought the population together in shared celebration of the cosmic order that sustained their civilization. The most important festival was Inti Raymi, the Festival of the Sun, celebrated at the winter solstice in June. This was the moment when the sun was farthest north, when the days were shortest and coldest in the southern hemisphere, when it seemed that the life-giving star might continue its northward journey and never return. The ceremonies at Inti Raymi were designed to call the sun back, to strengthen it for its return journey, to ensure that warmth and light would once again bless the land. The celebration began before dawn on the solstice day. The Sapa Inca, surrounded by the nobility of Cuzco and delegations from throughout the empire, gathered in the great plaza to await the first rays of the rising sun. As the light touched the eastern peaks and flowed down into the valley, the emperor raised a golden cup of chicha and offered a toast to his father, the sun, pouring the sacred drink into a channel that carried it to the temple of the sun. The day continued with dancing, feasting, and the sacrifice of llamas. The pure white llamas offered to the sun were the finest in the empire, carefully selected and maintained for this purpose. Priests examined their entrails for omens, seeking signs of the year to come. Fire, newly kindled by focusing the sun's rays through a concave gold mirror, was distributed to temples throughout the capital. Other festivals marked other moments in the agricultural and ritual calendar. Kapek Raymi in December celebrated the coming of age of young men of the nobility, who underwent trials and initiations that marked their transition to adulthood. Aimore in May was a harvest festival, giving thanks for the crops that would sustain the population through the coming year. Each month had its ceremonies, its processions, its offerings to the gods who regulated the cosmos. These festivals served important social as well as religious functions. They brought people together from distant parts of the empire, reinforcing the sense of common identity that held Tahuantinsuyu together. They demonstrated the power and generosity of the emperor, who provided the food and drink consumed during the celebrations. They reminded everyone of the cosmic order that the Inca claimed to maintain, the proper relationships between humans and gods, rulers and ruled, that ensured the continuation of life itself. As you continue to drift towards sleep, let these images of celebration fill your mind. Thousands of people gathered in the great plaza of Cusco, their finest clothes bright with color, the sound of drums and flutes echoing off the stone buildings. The emperor in his golden litter, surrounded by nobles in feathered headdresses. The sun rising over the mountains, bringing light and warmth to a people who called themselves its children. It was a spectacle of beauty and meaning, a moment when the human and divine worlds touched and the cosmic order was renewed. And so we pause in our journey, having explored the Inca Empire at its height. we have walked through the cloud-wrapped citadel of Machu Picchu, marveled at the engineering that raised massive stones and spanned dizzying gorges, and discovered the sophisticated systems that allowed millions of people to live together under a common rule. The empire we have described was one of humanity's greatest achievements, a civilization that built wonders without iron or the wheel, that governed vast territories without writing or money, that created prosperity and order across one of the most challenging landscapes on Earth. The children of the sun had much to be proud of, much to celebrate in their festivals, and to preserve in their traditions. But even as the empire reached its greatest extent, forces were gathering that would bring about its end. Internal tensions were growing, particularly around the question of succession. And far to the east, across an ocean the Inca did not know existed, a different civilization was preparing to expand in ways that would transform the entire world. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the daily lives and spiritual beliefs of the Inca people in greater depth, and we will begin to trace the events that led to the empire's dramatic fall. But for now, if sleep is calling you, let it come. Let your breathing slow, let your body relax completely, let the rhythm of these words carry you into peaceful rest. The stones of Machu Picchu stand watch over your dreams, ancient and patient, keeping their secrets through the centuries. The mountain spirits, the Apus, look down from their snowy peaks, guardians of a world that lives on in memory and story. Rest well, traveler. The journey continues whenever you are ready to return. Welcome back, gentle traveler, to our continuing exploration of the Inca Empire. As you settle once more into comfort, let your breathing slow and your body relax. We have journeyed far together, from the mythical origins of the Inca to the heights of their power, through the misty citadel of Machu Picchu, and along the engineering marvels that bound their empire together. Now, in this third part of our journey, we will explore the inner world of Inca civilization, the beliefs that gave meaning to their lives, the rituals that marked their passage from birth to death, the arts that expressed their vision of beauty and order. And as the night deepens around you, we will begin to trace the events that would bring this great civilization to its end. Take a deep breath now, filling your lungs with the thin, cool air of the highlands. Hold it for a moment, feeling the stillness, and then release it slowly, letting all tension flow out of your body. The story continues, patient and unhurried, carrying you ever deeper into the peaceful embrace of sleep. The Inca lived in a world alive with spiritual power. Every mountain peak housed an Apu, a mountain spirit that watched over the people living in its shadow. Every spring bubbled forth with the life force of Pachamama, the Earth Mother. Every unusual rock or ancient tree might be a huaca, a sacred place where the boundaries between worlds grew thin and the supernatural could be contacted. This was not a world divided sharply between sacred and profane, spiritual and material. The divine was woven into the fabric of everyday existence, present in the fields where farmers worked, in the homes where families gathered, in the roads that travelers walked. To live in the Inca world was to be constantly in relationship with powers greater than oneself, powers that demanded respect and offered protection in return. The great gods presided over this cosmos from their celestial realms. Inti, the sun, was the most important, the divine father of the Inca emperors and the source of light, warmth, and agricultural fertility. His golden face adorned the most sacred temple in Cuzco, and his festivals marked the turning points of the year. Mama, Quilla, the moon, was Inti's sister and wife, the patroness of women and the marker of the months. Her silver disk complemented the sun's gold, and her phases governed the ritual calendar. Eclipses of the moon were terrifying events, interpreted as attacks by cosmic jaguars that sought to devour her. Ilapa, the thunder god, commanded the storms that brought rain to the highlands. He was imagined as a warrior in the sky, drawing water from the celestial river of the Milky Way and hurling it down to earth as life-giving rain. His lightning bolts were both feared and revered. Above even these great gods stood Viracocha, the creator who had made the world and all living things. His nature was more abstract than the elemental deities, his worship more philosophical than popular. Some scholars see in the cult of Viracocha an emerging monotheism, a movement toward recognizing a single supreme being behind the multiplicity of divine forms. Death, for the Inca, was not an ending but a transformation. The dead did not depart to some distant realm, but remained present in the community, their mummified bodies preserved and venerated, their spirits consulted on important matters, their needs attended to as if they were still alive. When a person of importance died, their body was carefully prepared for its continuing existence. The internal organs were removed and preserved separately. The body was dried, sometimes with the aid of fire or the high, cold air of the mountain passes. The features were arranged in a lifelike expression, and the mummy was dressed in fine clothing. The mummies of deceased emperors received the most elaborate treatment. Each Sapa Inca, upon his death, was transformed into a sacred object of tremendous power. His mummy remained in his palace, attended by his descendants who formed a corporate group responsible for maintaining his cult. These royal mummies were brought out for festivals, paraded through the streets, offered food and drink. Spanish chroniclers describe festivals where the mummies of all the deceased emperors were brought into the great plaza of Cuzco, arranged in a row, and served food and drink, while their living descendants celebrated around them. The dead emperors were toasted, addressed by name, credited with the achievements of their reigns. The boundary between past and present dissolved in these ceremonies. The maintenance of proper relationships with the spiritual world required constant attention, a steady stream of offerings and rituals that acknowledged the powers upon which human life depended. Every household made daily offerings to the huacas that protected it. Every community celebrated festivals that honored local spirits. The simplest offerings were products of the land: coca leaves, chicha beer, maize kernels, guinea pigs. These were burned or buried or poured out, their essence released to nourish the gods while their material form was consumed by fire or earth. Coca was particularly sacred, its leaves central to nearly all Inca rituals. The coca plant grew in the warm valleys of the eastern slopes, and its leaves were traded throughout the empire as one of the most valued commodities. When chewed with a small amount of lime, coca releases alkaloids that suppress hunger and reduce the effects of altitude. Animal sacrifice played an important role in major ceremonies. Llamas, especially white llamas without blemish, were offered to the sun. The animal was killed with a cut to the throat, its blood collected in golden bowls and offered to the gods, its entrails examined for omens, its flesh consumed in a sacred feast. On rare occasions of extreme importance, human sacrifice was performed. The most solemn form was the capacocha, in which children selected for their physical perfection were sent from the provinces to Cusco, processed through the capital in great ceremony, and then dispatched to high mountain peaks where they were killed as offerings to the gods. The Inca produced objects of great beauty, though their aesthetic differed from what we might expect. Where many civilizations lavished attention on sculpture and painting, the Inca focused their artistic energy on textiles, metalwork, and the shaping of stone. These were the media through which they expressed their vision of order, harmony, and cosmic significance. Textiles were perhaps the most valued of all Inca arts. The finest cloth, called cambay, was woven from the wool of the vicuña, a wild relative of the llama whose fleece is finer than cashmere. Cambay was so precious that only royalty could wear it, and its production was restricted to specialists working in state workshops. The designs woven into Inca textiles followed strict conventions. Geometric patterns, arranged in bands and squares, carried information about the wearer's identity, status, and regional affiliation. A knowledgeable observer could read these textile messages, recognizing where a person came from and their place in the social hierarchy simply by looking at their clothing. Metalworking reached extraordinary heights under the Inca. Gold, associated with the sun, and silver, associated with the moon, were worked into objects of breathtaking beauty. The walls of the Coricancha were covered with sheets of gold, and the gardens of the temple contained gold and silver replicas of plants, animals, and insects. Inca metalworkers mastered techniques of casting, hammering, soldering, and gilding. They created alloys that combined gold with copper or silver, producing metals with different colors and properties. Much of this treasure was melted down by the Spanish for its bullion value, but surviving pieces demonstrate the skill and artistry of Inca craftsmen. Every Inca life was marked by rituals of transition, ceremonies that acknowledged the movement from one stage of existence to the next. These rites of passage connected the individual to the community, the living to the ancestors, the human to the divine. Birth itself was surrounded by ritual precautions. A woman about to give birth was isolated from the community, attended only by experienced midwives. The moment of birth was considered dangerous, a threshold between worlds when spiritual forces might intervene for good or ill. The first major ceremony came when the child was weaned, typically at about 2 years of age. This ritual, called Ruto Chiki, involved the cutting of the child's hair and the giving of its first name. Family and community gathered to celebrate, bringing gifts and offering prayers for the child's future. Puberty marked the most important transition, the passage from childhood to adulthood. For boys of the nobility, this was celebrated at the festival of Kapak Rami, when they underwent a series of trials and initiations. They fasted, ran races, engaged in mock battles, and endured other tests of endurance and courage. Marriage was universal and arranged by the community. The wedding ceremony was simple. The couple exchanged sandals, the groom placing his sandal on the bride's foot and she placing hers on his, symbolizing their union and mutual support. They then received a house and land assignment from the Ilu. Women in the Inca world occupied a complex position, subordinate to men in many ways yet essential to the functioning of society, and possessed of their own spheres of authority and influence. The primary work of women was weaving, not mere domestic labor but a sacred responsibility. Women also prepared food and chicha, the fermented maize beer that was essential to all social occasions. The making of chicha was a skilled process, requiring knowledge of fermentation, timing, and the addition of various flavorings. Some women achieved positions of considerable power. The queen, or koya, was the most important woman in the empire, the primary wife of the emperor and mother of his designated heir. Female Caracas, while rare, were not unknown, governing their communities in their own right. The most unusual status for women was that of the Aklakuna, the chosen women selected in childhood for their beauty and skill. These women lived in special houses, weaving cloth for the state and preparing chicha for ceremonies. Some became secondary wives of the emperor, or served as priestesses. The year was 1527, or perhaps 1528, and the Inca Empire stood at the height of its power. Huayna Capac, the 11th Sapa Inca, ruled over perhaps 12 million people. But strange reports were reaching the emperor. Messengers spoke of strangers appearing on the coast, pale-skinned beings in great floating houses. More alarming still was the disease that was spreading through the empire. It had come from the north, unlike any sickness the healers had seen before. People developed fever and weakness, then erupted in terrible pustules. Many died within days. This was smallpox, sweeping through the Americas ahead of the Spanish conquest itself. Huayna Capac himself fell ill with the strange disease. Despite the efforts of his healers, the emperor weakened and died. With him died many of the nobility and court officials. Before his death, Huayna Capac had designated his son Ninan Kayuchi as his successor. But Ninan Kayuchi also died, leaving the succession uncertain. Two other sons had strong claims: Huascar, the son of Huayna Capac's principal wife in Cuzco, and Atahualpa, the son of a secondary wife who had been raised in the north. Both gathered supporters, and the empire teetered on the brink of civil war. The civil war that erupted between Huascar and Atahualpa was the most destructive conflict in Inca history. It pitted the northern provinces, loyal to Atahualpa, against the southern provinces centered on Cusco, which supported Huascar. Armies marched and countermarched across the highlands, battles were fought, cities were sacked. Huascar held the traditional advantages. He had been crowned in Cusco with all the proper ceremonies. He controlled the heartland of the empire and the mummies of the former emperors. But Atahualpa commanded the northern armies, the most experienced troops in the empire, led by capable generals like Quisquis and Chalcachamac. The decisive engagement came near Cuzco itself, where Huascar's main army was destroyed. Huascar was captured, and his supporters were put to death. Atahualpa himself remained in the north, at the town of Cajamarca, resting and consolidating his victory. Messengers arrived with news that strangers had landed on the coast. This time they were not leaving. They were marching inland, toward Cajamarca, toward the victorious emperor himself. The strangers approaching Cajamarca were Spaniards, led by Francisco Pizarro. They numbered fewer than 200 men, accompanied by horses and small cannon. By any reasonable calculation, they should have been no threat to an emperor who commanded armies of tens of thousands. The Spaniards possessed crucial advantages. Their steel swords and armor were vastly superior to Inca weapons. Their horses gave them mobility and striking power never before encountered. Their firearms produced terrifying effects, and their diseases had already begun the work of devastation. Atahualpa seems to have underestimated the threat. The strangers were few in number. He agreed to meet with their leaders at Cajamarca, curious about these beings who came from beyond the edge of the world. The meeting was set for November 16, 1532. The morning of November 16, 1532, dawned cold and clear in Cajamarca. The Spanish had spent an anxious night watching the fires of Atahualpa's army burning on the hillside above. Pizarro had laid his trap with care. The cavalry was hidden in buildings around the central plaza, waiting in tense silence. The plan was audacious: lure Atahualpa into the plaza and capture him. If the gamble failed, there would be no escape. But Pizarro knew from Mexico that capturing the indigenous ruler could paralyze resistance and deliver an entire empire. In the early afternoon, the Inca procession finally moved. First came attendants sweeping the road and scattering flowers. Then came nobles in their finest clothes, gold ornaments flashing. Musicians played drums and flutes, singers chanted praises. At the center, carried on a golden litter by 80 lords in blue livery, came Atahualpa himself. He was dressed in the finest cumbi cloth, adorned with gold and emeralds, wearing the royal fringe of the Sapa Inca. More than 5,000 men accompanied him, though most carried only ceremonial weapons. This was to be a meeting, not a battle. A Dominican friar named Vicente de Valverde approached the emperor's litter with an interpreter. He attempted to explain Christianity and called upon Atahualpa to submit to the Spanish king and Christian God. Atahualpa's response was dismissive. He was the son of the sun, fresh from victory over his brother. According to some accounts, Valverde handed Atahualpa a Bible. The emperor examined the strange object, unable to read its mysterious marks, and threw it to the ground. Whether this was the trigger, or whether Pizarro had always intended to attack, the signal was given. A cannon fired, and the Spanish cavalry burst from their hiding places. Horses charged into the crowded plaza, swords swinging, lances thrusting. Arquebusiers opened fire. The Inca were trapped, unable to escape, unable to fight back effectively. They had come to a meeting, not expecting treachery. Within half an hour, the Battle of Cajamarca was over. Thousands of Inca nobles and attendants lay dead. Atahualpa was pulled from his litter and taken prisoner. Not a single Spaniard was killed. The divine ruler of the greatest empire in the Americas was captive to fewer than 200 men. Atahualpa quickly understood what his captors wanted: gold. He offered a remarkable bargain. He would fill the room where he was held with gold, and an adjoining room twice over with silver, in exchange for his freedom. The room was approximately 17 feet by 22 feet. Messengers went out across the empire carrying the emperor's command: strip the temples, empty the storehouses, gather every gold and silver object. Caravans of llamas loaded with treasure made their way to Cajamarca. Objects of extraordinary beauty arrived daily, representing millennia of artistic tradition. The Spanish, caring nothing for art, melted most of it down into ingots, erasing forever the accumulated artistic heritage of Andean civilization. During his captivity, Atahualpa learned chess, demonstrated his intelligence, and ordered the execution of his brother Huascar. He seems to have believed he could negotiate his way out, but the Spanish had no intention of releasing him. With the ransom collected, Atahualpa became dangerous. Charges were fabricated. A show trial was held. On July 26, 1533, Atahualpa was brought to the plaza of Cajamarca. He agreed to accept baptism, and the sentence was commuted from burning to strangulation. The last independent ruler of the Inca Empire died less than a year after his capture. And so we near the end of our journey through the story of the Inca Empire. We have traced its rise from humble origins, followed its expansion across the Andes, marveled at its achievements. Now we have watched as civil war and foreign invasion brought this great civilization to the brink of extinction. In our final chapter, We will follow the last years of Inca resistance, the desperate efforts to preserve something of their world. We will see how the empire crumbled, how its people adapted, and how the legacy of the Inca endures today. But for now, if sleep is calling you, let it come. The story will wait, patient as the mountains themselves. Let your breathing slow, let your body relax completely, let the rhythm of these words carry you into peaceful rest. The Inca Empire is falling, but the mountains remain. The stones of Machu Picchu still stand against the sky. Something endures, something survives. Hold that thought as you drift into dreams. Welcome back, gentle traveler, to the final chapter of our journey through the story of the Inca Empire. As you settle into comfort for one last time, let your breathing slow and your body relax completely. We have traveled far together, across mountains and centuries, through rise and fall, through triumph and tragedy. In this concluding part, we will follow the last desperate resistance of the Inca against Spanish conquest, explore the long centuries of colonial rule, and discover how the legacy of the children of the sun lives on in the modern world. It is a story of endings, yes, but also of endurance, of survival, of the persistence of culture and memory against the forces that would erase them. Take a deep breath now, filling your lungs one more time with that thin mountain air. Hold it for a moment, feeling the connection between past and present. And then release it slowly, letting the story carry you toward its conclusion, toward the peaceful rest that awaits at journey's end. With Atahualpa dead, Pizarro moved quickly to consolidate his conquest. He installed a puppet emperor, a young prince named Tupac Hualpa, who was a brother of both Huascar and Atahualpa. This new ruler would provide legitimacy to Spanish rule, while the real power remained firmly in Pizarro's hands. The Spanish began their march toward Cuzco, the sacred capital. The journey took them through the heart of the empire, along the great roads that the Inca had built. Tupac Hualpa died along the way, probably of smallpox, and was replaced by another prince, Manco Inca. Manco Inca was a son of Huayna Capac, who had survived the Civil War. He was intelligent, charismatic, and initially willing to cooperate with the Spanish. He saw in them a tool to defeat his enemies among the northern factions. He would soon learn how grievously he had miscalculated. The Spanish entered Cuzco in November 1533. They found a city of wonder, its buildings faced with perfectly fitted stone, its temples gleaming with gold. They also found the royal mummies seated on their thrones, surrounded by their treasures. The plundering began immediately. The gold that covered the walls of the Coricancha was stripped away and melted down. The Golden Garden was destroyed. The mummies were desecrated, their treasures stolen. Centuries of accumulated wealth and artistry were transformed into bullion and shipped to Spain. For Manco Inca, watching his ancestors' mummies violated and his people's heritage destroyed, the illusion of partnership faded. He was treated not as an emperor but as a puppet, subjected to humiliation. His wives were taken, his authority mocked, his people enslaved and brutalized. In 1536, Manco Inca escaped from Spanish custody and raised the banner of rebellion. Messengers went out across the empire, calling the people to arms. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, a vast army had gathered, perhaps 200,000 warriors united in determination to drive out the foreigners. The Inca forces laid siege to Cuzco, surrounding the city with an army so large that Spanish observers compared it to an ocean of men. The besiegers set fire to the thatched roofs, and Cuzco burned. The Spanish, numbering only a few hundred, retreated to two buildings around the central plaza and prepared to die. The siege lasted for months. The Spanish were on the verge of starvation, their ammunition nearly exhausted, their horses dying. Had the Inca been able to maintain the siege, the conquest might have ended there in the smoldering ruins of Cuzco. But agricultural obligations called the Inca warriors home for planting season, and the siege gradually weakened. A crucial turning point came at the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, which the Inca had occupied and from which they launched attacks on the Spanish below. In a desperate assault, Spanish cavalry charged up the steep slopes, fighting their way through the zigzag walls. The battle raged for days, with heavy losses on both sides. The Spanish eventually took the fortress, breaking the back of the siege. Manco Inca, his army depleted and demoralized, withdrew from Cuzco and retreated into the mountains. The Great Rebellion had failed, though resistance would continue for decades to come. Manco Inca retreated to the remote region of Vilcabamba, a rugged mountainous area on the eastern slopes of the Andes where the highlands give way to jungle. Here, in this nearly inaccessible territory, he established a rump state that would maintain Inca independence for nearly 4 decades. Vilcabamba became a center of resistance, a place where Inca culture and religion could continue relatively unmolested by Spanish interference. Manco Inca conducted raids against Spanish settlements and welcomed refugees fleeing colonial oppression. His court maintained the traditional ceremonies and customs, a living fragment of the empire that had been destroyed. In 1544, Manco Inca was assassinated by Spanish refugees, to whom he had given shelter. They killed him treacherously, hoping to win favor with the colonial authorities. But the Inca state in Vilcabamba continued under his sons, first Sayri Tupac, then Titu Cusi, and finally Tupac Amaru. For nearly 4 decades, Vilcabamba stood as a symbol of Inca survival, a reminder that the conquest was not complete. The Spanish made several attempts to negotiate with or subdue the rebel state, but the difficult terrain and the determination of its defenders protected it from direct assault. The end came in 1572, when the Viceroy Francisco de Toledo launched a full-scale military expedition against Vilcabamba. The jungle capital was captured, though Tupac Amaru escaped into the forest with a small group of followers. He was hunted down, captured, and brought back to Cusco in chains. The execution of Tupac Amaru in the Great Plaza of Cuzco marked the final end of Inca independence. Thousands of indigenous people gathered to watch, weeping as the last Sapa Inca was beheaded. With his death, the line of rulers that traced back to the mythical Manco Capac came to an end, 4 centuries of Inca history closing in blood and tears. As you continue to relax, let these images of resistance and defeat settle gently into your awareness. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, the Inca had fought to preserve something of their world. They had failed in the end, but their defiance gave meaning to their final years and preserved a spark of pride that would never be entirely extinguished. With the final defeat of Inca resistance, the Spanish colonial system settled over the Andes like a heavy blanket, smothering the old ways while slowly reshaping the land and its people. The Viceroyalty of Peru, administered from Lima on the coast, became one of the richest and most important of Spain's American colonies. The colonial economy was built on the extraction of silver, particularly from the great mines of Potosi in what is now Bolivia. These mines produced unimaginable wealth for Spain and created a voracious demand for labor. Indigenous people were drafted through the Mita system, a perversion of the Inca labor tax that now sent workers to die in the dark tunnels of the Silver Mountain. Conditions in the mines were horrific. Workers descended into the earth in shifts that lasted days, climbing up and down precarious ladders with loads of ore on their backs. The air was thick with dust that destroyed their lungs. Mercury used in the processing of silver poisoned their bodies. Thousands died every year, their lives sacrificed to feed Spanish hunger for precious metal. The indigenous population collapsed under the combined assault of disease, exploitation, and despair. Smallpox, measles, typhus, and other old world diseases swept through communities that had no immunity, killing millions. Some estimates suggest that the native population of Peru fell by 90% in the century following the conquest, one of the greatest demographic catastrophes in human history. The survivors found themselves at the bottom of a rigid social hierarchy. At the top stood the Peninsulares, Spaniards born in Spain who held the highest positions in church and state. Below them were the Criollos, people of Spanish descent born in the Americas. Then came various categories of mixed ancestry. And at the bottom, indigenous people and African slaves bore the heaviest burdens while enjoying the fewest rights. The Catholic Church played a complex role in this colonial world. Missionaries worked to convert the indigenous population, replacing the worship of the sun with the veneration of Christ, substituting Christian saints for local huacas. In many cases, this process was violent and coercive, with traditional religious practices suppressed and practitioners punished. Yet the church also provided some protection for indigenous communities, and some priests advocated for better treatment of the native population. Bartolomé de las Casas and others spoke out against the worst abuses, though their voices were often drowned out by those who profited from exploitation. The result was a society of contradictions, brutal, and yet not without moments of compassion. Despite the catastrophic losses, Andean culture did not simply disappear. The indigenous people adapted, blending old traditions with new impositions, finding ways to preserve something of their heritage while outwardly conforming to colonial demands. This process of cultural survival was subtle, persistent, and remarkably effective. Christian festivals were often grafted onto existing indigenous celebrations, with saints taking on attributes of traditional deities. The festival of Corpus Christi in Cusco incorporated many elements of the old Inca celebrations, with the mummies of the emperors replaced by statues of saints, but the general structure of the celebration preserved. Indigenous artists created paintings and sculptures that combined Christian themes with Andean symbolism. Traditional agricultural practices continued, often unchanged from Inca times. The terraces remained in use, the irrigation system still functioned, the crops still grew in the patterns established centuries before. The technology and knowledge that had made Andean agriculture so successful was too valuable to abandon, even as the political structures that had organized it were destroyed. Quechua, the language of the Inca, actually spread during the colonial period. The Spanish found it useful as a common language for administering diverse indigenous populations, and missionary priests learned it to spread the Christian message. What had been the language of empire became a language of cultural persistence, connecting communities across the former Inca territory. The memory of the Inca themselves became a powerful symbol of indigenous identity. Stories of the great emperors circulated secretly, growing more golden with each retelling. Prophecies emerged that one day an Inca would return to restore the old order and drive out the Spanish. These millenarian beliefs sustained hope through the darkest years of colonial rule. As you drift deeper towards sleep, consider this remarkable persistence. A people who had lost their empire, their rulers, their religion, their freedom, and yet who never entirely forgot who they had been. In hidden villages and secret ceremonies, in the patterns of their weaving and the names they gave their children, the memory of the Inca endured. The colonial period was not one of passive acceptance. Throughout the centuries of Spanish rule, indigenous people rose up again and again against their oppressors. Most of these rebellions were local, quickly suppressed, and largely forgotten. But some shook the colonial system to its foundations. The greatest of these was the rebellion of Tupac Amaru II in 1780. José Gabriel Condorcanqui was a curaca, a local chief who claimed descent from the last Inca emperor. He took the name Tupac Amaru after his ancestor and raised the banner of revolt against Spanish taxation and abuse. The rebellion spread rapidly across the highlands, attracting tens of thousands of followers. Tupac Amaru II called for the abolition of the Mita labor draft, the end of corrupt colonial practices, and the restoration of indigenous dignity. His army besieged Cuzco, just as Manco Inca had done more than 2 centuries before. The rebellion was eventually crushed with terrible brutality. Tupac Amaru II was captured and publicly executed in the plaza of Cusco, his tongue cut out, his body torn apart by horses, his family killed before his eyes. The Spanish authorities banned the use of indigenous dress, prohibited the Quechua language in official contexts, and attempted to erase all memory of the Inca. Yet the rebellion had lasting effects. It frightened the colonial authorities into making some reforms and demonstrated the continued power of indigenous resistance. The memory of Tupac Amaru II became another layer in the growing legend of Inca survival and eventual return. When Spanish America finally won its independence in the early 19th century, it was not through indigenous rebellion, but through movements led by criollos who sought their own autonomy from Spain. The new republics that emerged, including Peru and Bolivia, initially offered little improvement to indigenous people, who remained at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Today, nearly 5 centuries after the fall of Tawantinsuyu, the legacy of the Inca lives on in ways both visible and hidden. In the highlands of Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, millions of people speak Quechua, or Aymara, preserve traditional practices, and maintain connections to the ancient Andean past. Visit any market in the Andes and you will see the continuation of patterns established millennia ago. Potatoes in hundreds of varieties, maize in colors from white to purple to black, quinoa and amaranth, and countless other indigenous crops. The agricultural knowledge that the Inca systematized and spread still feeds millions, adapted to the challenging highland environment in ways that modern agriculture is only beginning to understand. Traditional textile arts continue, with weavers creating patterns that echo those found in pre-Columbian graves. The colors, the geometric designs, the techniques of spinning and weaving have been passed down through generations, mother teaching daughter, preserving knowledge that stretches back before written history. A skilled weaver today can create fabrics as fine as any produced in the time of the Inca. Religious practices blend indigenous and Christian elements in ways that would have been familiar to colonial-era observers. The Pachamama, the Earth Mother, is still honored with offerings of coca leaves and chicha. Mountain spirits still receive respect from those who live in their shadow. The Christian calendar has been adapted to accommodate older festivals, creating a syncretic religious culture that is neither purely indigenous nor purely European. The Huachaca Bridge, which we mentioned earlier, is rebuilt every year in a ceremony that directly continues Inca engineering traditions. Communities come together to harvest ICU grass, twist it into ropes, and construct a suspension bridge across the Apurimac River, just as their ancestors did for centuries before the Spanish arrived. The bridge itself is not necessary for modern transportation, but its renewal maintains a living link to the past. The festival of Inti Raymi, the winter solstice celebration of the sun god, was revived in the 20th century and is now celebrated every June in Cuzco. Thousands gather to watch performers in traditional dress reenact the ancient ceremonies, a spectacle that combines historical remembrance with tourist attraction. Whether this represents authentic cultural continuity or modern invention is debated, but its popularity testifies to the continuing power of Inca symbols. The rediscovery of Machu Picchu in 1911 transformed the world's understanding of the Inca and began a new chapter in their legacy. Hiram Bingham's photographs and writings introduced the lost city to a global audience, sparking fascination with Andean civilization that continues to this day. Machu Picchu has become one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world, drawing hundreds of thousands of tourists annually. The site was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1983 and was voted one of the new 7 wonders of the world in 2007. Its image has become iconic, appearing on everything from travel posters to album covers. This fame has brought both benefits and challenges. Tourism provides income for local communities and has increased interest in Peruvian culture and history. Archaeological research has revealed much about how the site was built and used, but the sheer number of visitors threatens to damage the delicate ruins, and the commercial exploitation of Inca heritage raises questions about who owns the past. Other Inca sites have been excavated and studied, revealing the full extent of their achievements. Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, Pisac, and dozens of other sites preserve examples of Inca architecture and engineering. The road system, the Quhapac Nian, has been surveyed and documented, recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site that spans multiple modern countries. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new aspects of Inca civilization. Capacocha sacrifices have been found on remote mountaintops, their frozen bodies preserving details of Inca life that would otherwise be lost. New sites are still being discovered in remote areas, hidden by jungle or known only to local communities, who have preserved the knowledge of their locations for generations. In recent decades, indigenous identity has become an increasingly important force in Andean politics and culture. Movements for indigenous rights have challenged the discrimination and marginalization that persisted long after colonial rule ended. In Bolivia, an indigenous president, Evo Morales, governed from 2006 to 2019, symbolizing the political power that indigenous communities can exercise. The Inca heritage is central to these movements. The rainbow flag of Tahuantinsuyu, the Wafala, has become a symbol of indigenous rights and Pan-Andean identity. Political rhetoric invokes the achievements of the Inca state, holding up its organization and its care for its people as models for contemporary governance. This political mobilization has been accompanied by cultural revival. Schools teach in Quechua and Aymara alongside Spanish. Universities offer programs in Andean studies. Musicians blend traditional instruments and melodies with modern genres. Writers and filmmakers explore indigenous themes and perspectives. The picture is not entirely positive. Indigenous communities still face discrimination, poverty, and the loss of traditional lands. The forces of globalization threaten to homogenize cultures that have survived for centuries. Climate change affects the highland ecosystems upon which traditional agriculture depends. The survival of indigenous culture requires constant effort and adaptation. Yet the persistence of that culture over 5 centuries of colonial rule and republican neglect offers grounds for hope. The Inca Empire fell, but the people who built it and their descendants survived. They adapted, they resisted, they preserved what they could of their heritage. That heritage lives on today in millions of people who still walk the mountains where the children of the sun once built their empire. And so we come to the end of our journey through the story of the Inca Empire. We have traveled far together, from the mythical emergence of Manco Capac from Lake Titicaca to the modern visitors who climb the ancient stairs of Machu Picchu. We have witnessed the rise of an empire and its fall, the persistence of a culture and its transformation. What lessons might we draw from this long history? Perhaps the most important is the remarkable adaptability of human cultures, their ability to survive catastrophe and rebuild, to preserve essential traditions while adapting to changed circumstances. The Inca created a civilization perfectly suited to the challenging environment of the Andes, and even after that civilization's political structures were destroyed, its cultural foundations endured. We might also reflect on the cost of empire, both for those who build them and those who are conquered. The Inca brought organization and prosperity to many peoples, but they also demanded submission and labor. The Spanish conquest brought new technologies and connections to a wider world, but at a price paid in millions of lives and the destruction of irreplaceable cultural heritage. The Inca story reminds us that history is not simply a chronicle of the powerful. Yes, emperors and conquistadors shaped the broad outlines of events. But the survival of Andean culture was the work of countless ordinary people who kept alive traditions, passed on knowledge, and maintained identity through the darkest times. History is made not only in palaces and battlefields, but in homes and fields, in the daily choices of people whose names are never recorded. As you continue to drift toward sleep, let these thoughts settle gently into your mind. The mountains of the Andes still stand, as they have stood for millions of years. The terraces still climb the slopes, the roads still trace their paths through the valleys. The descendants of the Inca still live in the shadow of the peaks that their ancestors worshipped. Something endures, something survives. Let us end with a vision of peace. Imagine yourself standing at Machu Picchu as the sun sets behind the western peaks. The tourists have departed, the guides have gone home, and you are alone with the ancient stones and the deepening shadows. The air grows cool as darkness spreads across the valley below. The first stars appear, the same stars that the Inca observed and named and wove into their myths. The Milky Way stretches across the sky, the celestial river that mirrors the earthly rivers far below. In the gathering darkness, the distinction between past and present seems to dissolve. You can almost hear the voices of those who lived here, the priests chanting in the temples, the workers calling to each other on the terraces, the emperor's litter bearers singing as they carried their divine master along the mountain roads. They are all gone now, returned to the earth they cultivated, but something of their presence lingers in the stones they shaped, the walls they built, the terraces they carved from the mountainside. This is what we inherit from the past, not just facts and dates, not just monuments and artifacts, but a sense of connection to those who came before us. They faced challenges we cannot imagine, built wonders we can barely comprehend, loved and suffered and hoped and dreamed just as we do. Their story is part of our story, their humanity reflected in our own. And now, as sleep draws near, let the image of those ancient mountains be the last thing in your mind. Snow-capped peaks catching the last light of day. Stone walls rising in perfect harmony. The sound of wind moving through empty doorways, carrying whispers of the past. The children of the sun have departed, but the sun still rises over the mountains each morning, as it has for billions of years, as it will continue to do long after we too have passed into memory. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of the Inca Empire. I hope these hours have carried you gently toward restful sleep, filling your mind with images of mountains and stone, of emperors and farmers, of a civilization that rose among the clouds and left behind monuments that still inspire wonder. Sleep now, if you have not already drifted away. Let your breathing slow, let your body relax completely, let all the tensions of the day dissolve into peaceful rest. The story is finished, but the mountains remain. The Inca are gone, but their legacy endures. And you, traveler, are part of the long chain of humans who have wondered at their achievements and preserved their memory. Dream of Terraced mountains and golden temples. Dream of roads stretching across impossible distances. Dream of a people who called themselves the children of the sun and built an empire among the stars. Dream and rest and wake refreshed to face a new day in this ancient and wonderful world. Good night, traveler. May the Apus watch over your sleep, and may you wake to a morning as bright as the gold that once adorned the temple of the sun. Sleep well.